Alrighty, this will be a two-part video series. First video is obviously, as you saw, me talking about the gameplay. Second video will be writing and storytelling, and just basically everything that isn't gameplay surrounding this. I, of course, have to start this video with what I've realized I need to start every opinion piece video with, my disclaimer, which I'll just copy and paste the one that I used for my Dark Souls 3 video because I'm lazy and unmotivated. I want to get this out of the way first. This is not a teardown or an attack on people that like anything that I criticize or personally don't enjoy. Pretty much all my video essay content is just for the sake of trying to express what I believe to be interesting ideas that maybe other people might find interesting as well. Opinions are opinions. My opinions are my own. They aren't facts. They're just my thoughts, and I respect other people's personal experience. Take no issue with any opinions they might have. If you disagree or feel that I'm being unfair in some way, I feel we'd both appreciate you simply bringing up your criticisms of my stance or perhaps my arguments. I'm always open to, changing my mind after hearing logical arguments that I haven't yet considered, and even though I may seem like a very angry and strongly opinionated person at times, my venting isn't necessarily a reflection of my actual beliefs. I'll always listen with an open mind if someone wants to tell me something, so that'll be less annoying. Ultimately, though, I know I can't control anyone on the internet, so I can only try to present myself in as fair a manner as possible. But just the fact that I have an opinion that a lot of people might disagree with can be enough for some of them to just plug their ears and start attacking me without engaging in a real dialogue, as I have found numerous times before. So, as always, the only person that can change your mind is yourself. No one else can adjust you if you just want to continue believing what you already believe, so you have to be the one that's critical of your own opinions and beliefs and consider the possibility that a different perspective might be viable. Same is obviously true for me. But at the end of the day, not trying to actually change anyone's mind, that's not really the goal, just trying to express my thoughts and ideas that I think other people might find interesting in some way, even if they ultimately disagree. So, this is going to be me talking about my analysis of the gameplay of FF7R, having beaten it, 3 times through, twice on normal. I mean, hard mode is technically post-game content, but I guess that counts as a full playthrough. I've done everything that requires being awake. I don't have the Platinum Trophy for getting the other dresses and that kind of shit, because that's just boring and a waste of my time. However, given my intensely autistic way of breaking games down and analyzing the systems and mechanics, even if I had only played this game once through, my observations would no doubt be much more nuanced than those of the average player. And in fact, I've done my due diligence in watching a bunch of other people play through the game, give their thoughts on it to ensure that my ideas were significantly more advanced and all-encompassing than, someone else's on the internet. And to make sure that no one else just knew something that I didn't somehow, which can happen from time to time. No one is immune to just ignorance. Blah, 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 you don't really care about this shit, so let's move on. Now, the average fan of something, their instinct is obviously, if anything they like is being criticized in any way, they try to leap to the defense and make up a bunch of shit on the spot that might not be very sound logic. They act like just because some argument could be made for why something that's being criticized isn't actually a weakness, they think that shitty, half-assed counter-arguments are somehow able to invalidate much more substantial arguments. Even though most everyone understands that nothing is ever perfectly clean-cut, everything has flaws, they still can't stand the idea of criticism, which I get, I understand that, okay? It's human nature, it's an ego-driven response. When you consider yourself a fan of something, you feel personally insulted, or like you're being judged, or like your personal judgment is being insulted when something you like gets criticized. I get it. So rest assured, I have no real issue with anyone who just has different opinions. Like what you like, it's all cool. These are simply my observations as a game designer for what weaknesses there are, and how they could be potentially improved in later games, as well as just arbitrary advantages that could be added. Yes, that is indeed the purpose of this video, to speculate on how the gameplay could be made into something very good from the place that it currently is, which is more or less mediocre in my opinion, or just acceptable. In general, I'm going to cover topics in this order: an analytical view of the genre trappings of the game, my thoughts on its relative linearity and structure, the clusterfuck nature of combat, poor game communication, lack of player direction given through game mechanics, player input not being directly tied to any genre of gameplay, mini games and puzzles being bad, the quality and reward of player exploration, the accumulation of overall content, and because I am indeed starkly aware of the real reasons why most plebeian, normal people, whatever, enjoy this game, a critical analysis of what could be done in the mechanics to make things more cool and hype, quote-unquote. So let's get into it. Okay, well, for genre, I've already talked about this in other videos, so I think I'll copy and paste my thoughts from my 2020 game video into this video because, again, laziness is my strongest superpower.
All that aside, I also wanted to talk about an aspect of the gameplay that I recently had a sort of epiphany on. I realized that things in the middle suck. Everything that's in the middle is the worst. I mean this in multiple different senses, but for this, I'm talking about game balance and mechanics. You know how in Dark Souls, most players probably don't summon help? You can. It's a mechanic in the game. There's no real penalty for it. You can just do it. You can just summon an ally. It's a tool at your disposal. Just say the word. But you don't. You don't because most people probably consider that to be taking the pussy way out, right? The game was clearly built for single player anyways. So, even though you could, you ignore that gameplay mechanic entirely, unless you're really struggling, but even then, you would feel guilty for utilizing that mechanic. But what about, say, like Destiny 2 or some MMO? What if you do a raid? You pretty much need allies, right? In the same situation, you have the ability to summon online help. But in this situation, you don't ruminate over it, you don't feel guilt over it. This should be obvious. It's a matter of game balance. One of them, you really don't need to summon help. You don't need to summon help to play Dark Souls. And one of them you do, okay? Through balance, your brain instinctively categorizes mechanics as part of the core game or as something optional, something secondary, something unnecessary, something to give you an advantage if you can't fucking hack it with, like, the core elements. Some people do this more than others. And what people categorize as, what is in their mind also depends on their experiences. See, if a game is really easy, it's fine, because you can just blow through it no problem. If a game is really hard, it's fine, because you focus, you put your effort into using your tools and overcoming the challenge. If a game is medium, however, it starts to kind of drag, and that's what I've been experiencing lately. If a game is too easy with a certain mechanic, I drop that mechanic. That's typically how I play most things, okay? I look at what's necessary, I push myself to find what is the most optimal thing that I can possibly do. Now, for FF7R, that means that for 98% of the game, I don't use any MP. No magic, no healing spells. I never used a single item in combat in the entire game. I never used a single summon, except just to see what they do. And even then, I ignored it most of the time. I think I used one summon at one time, and I was like, whatever. I also ignored limit breaks, as they were also unnecessary. However, that's the thing. The game isn't easy enough or hard enough to make this work. I can't nicely balance it for myself to create the optimal experience. In almost every encounter in the game, you don't need to use magic. You just don't. You don't need to spend a single drop of MP. You just use the core gameplay mechanics with each character and their established tools. However, in very rare parts of the game actually really does expect you to use magic, and it teeters the line between being something that I'm forced to use and being something that I can ignore completely. Because in the parts where I clearly don't need to use any magic, I was having more fun, a lot more fun. I just don't use anything that I don't need to. I continue to hone my complete mastery of the fundamental mechanics. But sometimes the game would really drive a stick up my ass in some encounters when I didn't use magic, and I experienced the same feeling that, we all get when summoning help in Dark Souls. The feeling of, come on, I've beaten so much of this game without relying on this fucking pussy shit. I shouldn't be doing this. I feel bad for even doing this. That's how I felt whenever I used magic in this game. And that really brought down my enjoyment levels while playing FF7R. Frankly, it's just not balanced well. Mechanics should be either necessary or unnecessary in game balance. Either make the game actually require the use of magic in more than just a few fights in the game, or make it completely ignorable. As it stands, I feel filthy when using magic, when I know for a fact I don't need to, and that I'd be playing in a more mathematically optimal way by just not using any MP at all, but I'm miserable trying to beat some of the fights in the game that they just expect you to use magic with. Both feel wrong to me. Using magic when I know for a fact that I don't need to, and that, it's better to not, because it's a resource game. If you can save more resources, that means you're playing more optimally. But then sometimes it's just like, no, fuck you. Oh, one relatively major issue I have with the gameplay is that it just isn't incorporated very well. The blending of action strategy and RPG aren't mixed properly. Let me explain. Let's look at, say, XCOM, which blends grid-based strategy gameplay with the overworld decisions for what missions to do, what facilities to build, what research to do, and so on. How well you do in the grid-based gameplay determines the survival of your best soldiers and their health, and depending on how you play and what missions you play, you also get greater rewards for your other style of gameplay. If you use fewer explosives, you'll have more corpses of the aliens remain intact, and other rewards that give you a slight or significant edge. Then, if you do the overworld gameplay and decision-making like shit, eventually, it won't matter how good you are at the grid-based combat, you simply won't be able to win against the increasing difficulty of the encounters. Both styles of gameplay are necessary and feed into one another. However, if we look at this action RPG, it doesn't blend well. I beat this game almost never spending a drop of MP, and many other resources you have, because my focus, as it is with every game I play, is to try to optimize. Logically speaking, it's a game where your most limited resource that feeds all your other resources is MP. MP recovers your health with healing spells. MP gives you all of the magic tools. Nothing else really matters, except for items, I guess, which are single use like they are in most RPGs. So it stands to reason that if you can beat an encounter, spending 20 MP and 3 items, but you could have beaten the same encounter only spending 4 MP and no items, the less costly one is clearly more optimal. It's clearly that you did better at the game to get the one that costs less, right? The problem with this game is that most of the gameplay can be trivialized by one style of gameplay whilst ignoring the other. I don't need to manage resources if I can beat almost every encounter in the game spending 0 MP and 0 items. The problem is, most of the stuff that deals any real damage to you is stuff that you can just dodge. Assuming the clunky dodge doesn't screw you over, okay? There's some issues, some clunkiness with that, but you can just play the action strategy element of the game well. You can play it really well. That's the most fun part of it. And you'll never have to manage any resources. You'll never have to spend any magic, none of it. You remove that entire part of the game that is an RPG. My problem with this game is that most of it seems to be designed with the action strategy in mind, although that might be giving the game too much credit since the overarching gameplay isn't cohesive enough for me to think that any of it was designed with any particular goal in mind. Thus, by playing optimally, i.e. not spending any MP and just getting better at the tools that don't cost any resources, and this is even more trivialized by Eris, considering she can exchange ATB for MP by using her move that steals MP from an enemy, or just putting some HP ups on Barrett once he has Lifesaver, and just giving him the Chakra ability, which also doesn't cost MP, that will heal all the damage the party takes purely through ATB, not MP. By playing optimally, this game is just action strategy. So I get used to it only being action strategy, a game where I don't have to manage resources or spend any MP or anything, or decide what resources to spend or how much, because I don't need to. I don't need to spend anything, okay? Sometimes encounters more or less just force you to use magic, or otherwise have big attacks that you can't really dodge with the action strategy tools, and it suddenly just gives you this whiplash, because now it's deciding that it does want to be an RPG where you have to take some damage and spend some of your resources to heal. but it did so at the expense of making the action strategy elements and skills that you've developed meaningless, since you can't use them to minimize the damage that you received anymore if some of the attacks are, like, unavoidable. Obviously, a lot of the enemies need tweaking, and there should probably be more things that just that deal some amount of damage to you no matter what, but you can minimize that damage through more strategic decision making. Like things that force you to block, and you still take some damage when you block, but not the full damage, or situations where you can avoid taking large damage by taking a little bit of damage, but, you know, whatever, okay? I think a very easy way to fix this element so that both the action strategy elements and the RPG elements work in harmony is to just make the special abilities cost HP. Make Braver cost HP. Make all of those moves cost a bit of health. Like how Persona ensures that you're spending some sort of minor resource in order to deal damage and to kill the enemies quickly enough by using physical skills that cost HP. That way, playing the game well and dodging all the big damaging attacks will still, over time, force you to heal and spend resources. Although, even if that was changed, if that's the only change to the game, then it'd still mean that healing magic is the only magic that you would ever be encouraged to use, and that, and even that can just be replaced with items instead, healing items. There needs to be more pressure to use actual attack spells or status effect spells, so that the game the game needs to be rebalanced so that the cost of not using them is more expensive than the cost of using them. I played Bug Fables this year as well, and it also has this problem. Doing special moves is so expensive in comparison to just doing regular attacks and then healing later when you take a bit of damage that it would be stupid in 90% of cases to ever use any of the special moves. The easiest way to do this in FF7R would probably be to have the enemies, like, say, slowly charge up big, dangerous attacks that you won't be able to effectively avoid it entirely, and making the magic so strong that the best option would be to damage the enemy to kill him or to interrupt him before he does the big move, so that you won't have to spend a greater amount of MP healing the damage that he would have otherwise done if you didn't attack him with it, right? Again, Persona 5 does this flawlessly. It's constantly pushing you to use some resources to avoid taking a lot of damage from enemies that you would have to spend more resources to spend on SP, to heal. And you have to strategize in order to do what you need to do with as few resources as possible, utilizing a wide arsenal of tools that will allow you to get more value out of the resources that you are planning to spend if you plan them properly. Make the gameplay styles blend so that both styles are necessary, both action strategy gameplay and calculated resource management decision making. That way, it won't just annoy me when I'm playing several hours of an action strategy game only to just suddenly run into an enemy that expects me to use magic on him out of nowhere. As it stands, magic is only just barely stronger than the non-magic tools, but at a much greater cost. 0 MP versus some MP is a significantly greater cost. Make the game... Okay, here's another way to do it. Make the game way, way harder, but make it so that magic doesn't need ATB. That's another way of giving magic and spending MP a clear purpose that would perhaps make it a necessity that would mix well and not just be completely outclassed by the less expensive regular skills. Right now, being good at the resource management aspect of the game just means never using a resource, because you don't need to.
Now, this video is a few months old now, and I've since updated my opinions and knowledge a little bit. Having replayed FF7R again and again, testing a lot more stuff in it, in this video I said that the reason you don't need to spend MP in this game is because you can avoid big damage, but that isn't necessarily strictly the case all the time. Chakra and prayer, and a few other things that allow you to replenish HP during a fight, are so insanely broken that the only times you'll ever use MP to heal are in some of the post-game fights that deal a lot of damage quickly and are more or less unavoidable, and maybe just some main game 1 or 2 hard fights, but like hard, quote-unquote. They're not actually hard, but playing the game through, I beat, say, the boss rush in the post-game, boss rush to the Pride and Joy prototype. On my first try with ease, a bunch of my materia was only at like 3 stars, nowhere near being maxed out or anything because I was too lazy to grind levels on materias or weapon upgrades or just levels in general or anything. And at no point in that encounter, which is the strongest combat firefight in the entire game, I did not even remotely come close to losing. That was the only point in the game where one of my character's MP gauges went below 90% full. And how far did it go down? Well, all the way to the monumental expense of still above 85% full. So is magic good for anything in this game? Well, kind of. If the game was just flat out harder, it would more frequently force you to spend MP on healing magic, but still, it would take forever for that to actually wear down your resources. For instance, the boss rush hard mode Bahamut fight where he summons Ifrit, I could have fought 10 of that Bahamut fight back to back to back with 0 MP getting restored between fights, and I could have done that with easily without running out of MP. Eventually, if I fought enough of them back to back, I'd probably actually die at some point, maybe like 12, 13, 14 of them in, but it would take so long for that to happen that I don't see the game doing that at any point, even if the game were actually made harder all around. Strictly speaking, there are 3 ways that you can fail in combat in this game. 1. You run out of the ability to use revives or healing or running out of items or MP, which will only ever happen if you're actively wasting MP on shit like attack magic that is just not as optimal as reserving it entirely for healing. 2. You're getting attacked so frequently or otherwise you are so irresponsible, this is the main point, with your ATB consumption, that you still could have the MP to heal or revive or whatever you need to have done, but you just can't hit the enemies fast enough or well enough to get the ATB that you need to do those moves in time, and so you die. This is probably why most people would die playing this game in any of the fights in which they do die. And again, this is pretty much only going to happen if the player just makes poor choices with their ATB. If you save at least a bar of ATB around for healing and like 1 or 2 characters in your party, that if you consider that you might need it sometime soon, I don't think you can die in this game because of not being able to generate ATB fast enough. And 3, your party just gets wiped out instantly by a single giant instant kill attack before you had the chance to spend ATB or MP. Avoiding these situations is just a matter of just doing whatever needs to be done to avoid them, like applying barrier ahead of time or just setting yourself up in the pre-fight menu with more HP ups to tank the damage, if that'll allow you to survive the instant kills, or an elemental resistance to whatever type of attack that it is that wipes you out. Those are the 3 deaths. The only ways that you can fail in this game. I guess 4 would be like a player fucking around and literally not paying attention and not thinking to heal or revive, even if there was nothing actually stopping them from doing that. The point I want to make with that breakdown of all the ways that you can fail in the game is that there is nothing in the game that will actually force you to run out of MP, so the first death will only ever happen to idiots who waste MP in a suboptimal way. And if the game were harder, in the sense that enemies can damage you enough that Chakra and Prayer isn't all that you need to keep up with the damage that you're constantly receiving, and it was increased to the point where there's actually a possibility of them making you run out of MP through pure healing magic, then for that to happen, they'll probably be dealing so much damage so quickly that that situation won't even happen. It won't come to pass at all, because the damage will be outpacing the rate that you can get ATB for that healing. So you'll probably be more likely to die the second type of death long before you ever die the first type of death. This is important because it proves that even if things were changed to actually challenge you and force you to use magic, the game still wouldn't really have a resource management element to the strategy. You'd still be spending resources to avoid a quick death rather than spending resources to avoid, a greater expenditure down the line. I mentioned in my earlier video, but I need to say it again, The cost of not spending resources needs to be greater than the cost of spending resources for a strategy RPG like this to function. That is the bare bones of the genre. Again, let's look at a simple situation in Persona 5. Say you're fighting an enemy one-on-one, really oversimplified circumstances. The enemy is weak to wind. You have wind magic on you. If you knock them down with that wind magic, you can kill them right away. If you don't, they'll survive a hit from your strongest non-magic attack. What are your options in this situation? You can do a regular attack or a physical skill to damage the enemy, and there's a % chance that you'll land a critical hit, thus knocking them down and winning the fight anyways. But that chance is pretty low and not very reliable, so I probably wouldn't do that. If you are going to take that chance, it's strategically smarter to do the regular attack rather than the physical skill, because it doesn't really matter how much damage you're dealing, you're just trying to get the crit, which is the same chance either way between both moves, so it's better to use the option that costs nothing than the option that costs some HP. If you go for the regular attack and it does not crit, as it probably won't, the enemy gets their turn, will attack you for a large amount of damage. Let's say you kill them in the next turn with the raw damage from a physical attack that spends about 7% of your max HP, and the enemy dealt, let's say, 45% of your max HP from their attack. You have won the fight, as was never in doubt, but now you must heal, and you need to spend 6 SP on Diorama to heal the damage that you've taken. Now, if we rewind, you could have done a wind spell at the very start of the fight for 4 SP and killed the enemy right away. In the end, you spent 2 SP less than the other route. You saved SP in the long run by spending some right away in the moment. This is the most simplistic version of this concept I can really present, like a really basic bitch, obvious fucking version of it. But yes, the point is, for a resource management game to work, you need to be incentivized to spend some resources in order to avoid having to spend more resources down the line. In FF7R, this never happens. Pretty much, if you're casting attack magic, you are just wasting resources. You could have easily just saved that for healing later and gotten 5 times as much done in the meantime. You remember me mentioning that the Bahamut fight that I could have done 10 in a row of without running out of SP? You can spend magic to kill Bahamut really quickly, but doing so costs so much more MP. If you fought them in a row in that same way, you'd probably only be able to do maybe 2 of them before running out of MP and then not being able to fight anymore. Is magic good for anything in this game? Kind of, but not in a practical sense. Magic lets you kill things quickly. There's tons of quick kill setups for bosses, and magic as a stat is the one thing that you can keep buffing in terms of DPS thanks to magic up materials and shit like that. However, this will never actually make you more powerful than doing things my way, as I already described with how many Bahamuts I could kill in a row, as opposed to people that use magic. Don't get me wrong, I like the speedrun strats, okay? Quick kills are super cool, they're genuinely fun to pull off. I don't mind that, okay? I don't mind using magic to ice a boss in, like, seconds. The real problem is, the game has no challenge to it. The game will never present you with a situation where you have to actually be good at the gameplay. I said I could kill 10 Bahamuts back to back to back, but the thing is, that doesn't happen. That never happens. I can't even make that happen. There's no point in the game where you have the option to try to kill 10 Bahamuts in a row with no MP restoration in between or anything like that. My way of playing is more optimal. It is mathematically more optimal. I could conquer a much greater challenge playing my way than anyone else could playing their way of wasting MP on magic and shit, but no such challenge even exists in the game. For instance, once again, let's look at P5, okay? You could play on hard, beat the first palace in a single day with no additives or SP regen bullshit, okay? I have a relatively popular video on my channel from years back of me doing this and explaining some of the strategies at play, but yeah, now, you don't need to do this. The only reward you get for doing this is just some, like, personal pride, or the fact that you don't have to spend 1 extra day finishing the palace. But still, it is a challenge that you can undertake with at least some tiny little reward for doing so, to commemorate your skill at the game and your ability to optimize that you could accomplish that feat. This game doesn't even have something for me to test my optimization against. Mathematically, I know that my play is far more optimal than everyone else I've seen play, but there is no even like Nuzlocke-esque chance for me to challenge something truly difficult to put my optimization to the limit. There is no reward for my superior mastery of the game mechanics, and that fucking blows. That blows my dick hole inside out. That is so fucking annoying. That the game just flat out doesn't even have the opportunity to create my own artificial challenge, and that there is just straight up nothing in the game that gives you any reason, even the tiniest reason in the world, to actually improve your skills and comprehension of the game mechanics. The hardest thing in the game is the boss rush VR thing, and that is still super easy. Okay, these factors all come together to make a highly unsatisfying genre experience. In all honesty, I mean, if you break down what skills you need to complete any trial or challenge or instance, this game is not an RPG at all. But it also isn't an action strategy game either. Think about it. What skills do you need to be good at in this game? What skills actually improve your ability to accomplish the gameplay? We just established that there is nothing to even be good at, quote-unquote, because there's no opportunity to challenge your skills against something. But what do you think makes you good at, say, the resource management in this game? Well, that would be never spending MP on the vast majority of magic options in the game that are extremely wasteful, okay? Never spending it on offensive magic, except maybe in very, very, very rare, highly specific circumstances, like if you need to spend magic to break a barrier so that you're allowed to deal damage again. But beyond that, do all your healing without MP if you can, and if you know that you won't be able to heal everything in maybe a tougher fight with just ATB, then just cast like regen on yourself at the start of the fight and keep that up, because it's mathematically more optimal to heal that amount of health via the 6 MP that regen costs than the single use like Curaga bullshit healing crap, you know? What does it mean to be good at the action strategy elements in this game? Blocking attacks, not running face first into hits, being aware of when attacks are going to strike you, dodging attacks when possible, babysitting your party members to get them out of dangerous situations that the AI is too stupid to get them out of without you intervening, optimizing your damage output based on your ATB generation per second. In truth, none of these skills affect your success. Here and now, I will describe what equates to success in this gameplay. Here we go. Proactively healing your party. Don't just wait until they're in the red. Keep the team healthy in advance. Keep ATB around in case of emergency situations. Don't put yourself in a terrible situation of your own creation for no goddamn reason by wasting all your ATB. Don't fucking spend MP that you don't need to and end up running out of it. And maybe, I don't know, block every once in a while. When you are damaged, heal or revive if necessary. In every other respect, do whatever the fuck you want, so long as you're not breaking one of those rules. There you go. Done. I have described to you the simplistic steps that lead to victory in basically every fight in this entire game, no matter what you do. You can fail to understand how enemy attacks work. You can get hit by like 90% of the attacks. You know, you can completely fail to respond to anything that like this particular enemy does or anything, but so long as you follow those steps, you will win. You will achieve victory in all circumstances. It doesn't matter if you block this attack or optimize your DPS in this way or that way. It doesn't really matter if you avoid this damage or get your allies to do their jobs effectively or pretty much anything, okay? The only other danger in this game is the third type of death, the instant kill that you cannot block or dodge, which just comes down to having your materia set up in advance to avoid that death, which isn't exactly deep or challenging gameplay. It's just, did you happen to equip the win button or didn't you? Wow, such nuanced fucking design. You don't have to employ action strategy skills or decision making. You don't have to employ good RPG resource management calculations and optimizations. You don't have to be logical or skillful in any way. You don't even have to pay attention to what you're doing. Just follow the basic instructions that I just laid out, and that is the entire game. That, my friends, is the genre problem with this game. The factors that impact your success are way too general. They don't involve strategically thinking or action strategy-based skills. The degree of how well you do based on your RPG or your action skills is so minor in comparison to other basic factors that you might as well not even develop your skills at all. And the game lacks any opportunity to challenge yourself and your skills in these genres or your knowledge of situations in this game. So how do we fix this? Well, for one, you need to allow at least a potential challenge to exist in the game. I'll talk about this more later, but the game needs an actual hard mode, not just a weird post-game thing that's actually not even hard at all. The game needs to have some form of actual challenge to it. Maybe not inherently, but the player needs to be able to create a challenge for themselves. I mentioned Nuzlocke before, like a player inflicts their own rules on their own game to make it harder, but nevertheless, they still can make that challenge while measuring their skill of all of the core game mechanics. RPGs can do this easily. Just make it so the players can tackle things of a greater challenge while being underleveled. Hell, let people not level up if they don't want to. Let people fight more things in a row than they really have to without restoring their resources in between. Let players have something to challenge themselves with that can scale infinitely, not just whatever the designers seem to think is a real challenge, like this baby shitcake easy fucking post-game content. As for the resource management, like I said, the game needs to punish you for not spending resources in many cases, and then create complex systems through which the player can employ logical strategies to get the greatest value out of the resources that they are planning to spend. As I brought up in my video, you could empower magic by giving it properties nothing else has, such as allowing it to be used without ATB, and making the game much harder by comparison. That would probably actually be the most simplistic and elegant solution, because it also inherently nerfs materia such as chakra and prayer, which are broken overpowered in the game right now. There are literally times where you could straight up just set the controller down, only hitting a button to cast chakra or prayer when you have the ATB for them and nothing else, and the enemies would literally not be able to kill you because they just don't damage you fast enough. You're inherently rewarded for dragging out a fight by getting infinite healing through just ATB, and you aren't penalized in any way for just dragging out a fight. By making the game way harder, but just letting you use magic all the time, you can make the game deadly enough to make it so that you can't just get by with only chakra and prayer, thus killing two birds with one stone, solving two problems. You'd probably have to buff the offensive magic somehow, or make it more vital to the core gameplay, either just through pure damage, or stagger, or something else, or adding... I do think the game needs more mechanics. Other mechanics that are smarter designed games have already, like giving the use of magic some kind of special benefit by itself, like if you hit an enemy with what they're weak to, you get buffed or they get nerfed, or there's some sort of priming system where only certain attacks can trigger certain reactions at all, like say all attacks can increase the stagger gauge, but only magic can actually trigger the stagger. Countless games already manage this no problem. Just study those games more closely and develop this incredibly basic understanding of game design before you go around designing games. There's no reason for a giant company like Square Enix to publish a massive budget game with game design this fucking amateurish, with insanely basic fundamental concepts like this somehow not being understood or implemented. Relatively small point. Let's cover this really quickly, but I don't think the weapon upgrades in this game are very meaningful, and some of them are just like bizarre. Like this one weapon will have a 16 SP upgrade that is objectively worse than a 4 SP upgrade you could get instead, or like a 5% increase for some hyper-specific thing. By far and away, the upgrades that you actually notice while you're playing are the materia slot upgrades, and even then, why the hell would I really want like 3 different linked materia pairings and one weapon? I don't care at that point. And the other one that I noticed while playing is the self-healing boost at low HP, which is massive, especially when paired with chakra, which is already broken overpowered by itself. Beyond that, minor percent changes or stat increases I do not really notice while I'm playing. Maybe they do actually make a significant difference that I'm just in the moment to see, while playing, but they don't make me play the game any differently. I have no sense of how valuable critical hits are, even to this day. So I don't know if building towards a high crit rate with a crit weapon is any good or not. All I know is having the crit rate boost at low HP is not something I'm willing to do when avoiding damage in this game is so obnoxiously annoying. The only weapons that change how you play are the ones that have totally different movesets, all of which are pretty not great, like Nailbat or Barrett's melee weapons. I'm just gonna pick the weapon with, like, self-healing, high HP, and high MP. This is all just stuff that impacts the feeling of progression in the game as an RPG, which I'm going to talk about more nearer to the end of this video, but this is a good opportunity to transition to the discussion of linearity, because it's also closely tied with progression mechanics. Now, this is something that I feel more people naturally agree with, but this game is too linear for having this kind of gameplay. You don't get to test anything out by refighting the same enemy types or the same encounters. Probably more than 90% of the encounters in this game are one-time only occurrences. Pretty much. You only really get substantial fights to replay once you get all the way to Corneo's Cup, like halfway through the game, and then later in Chapter 14 when you're allowed to go back there again. At any other point, you really don't have the freedom to experiment much for an RPG. There are some circumstances where you can refight the same monsters, but they're incredibly weak and the fight is way too short to test anything out on. It was hours and hours into the game before I could even sit down and just test anything, test numbers, test damage output. When I'm playing a linear encounter in a mission, I have a desire to play my best abilities rather than just dick around and experiment. And it's just not being allowed to test shit out or having any means of, like, farming if you wanted to, say, try out a new materia and level up its AP, and the enemies themselves. You don't get to keep fighting these specific encounters and learning how these enemies' moves work, how they respond to this kind of hit stun, whether you can interrupt them with it, whether or not you can avoid them, learn their animations, what the names of their moves fucking mean, stuff like that. The entire game structure of combat encounters really needs to be worked on. This kind of impacts pretty much everything in the game. Like, you can't talk about the optional side content without looking at how they're trying to fit a square peg into a round hole with some of these choices. Just look at how awkward the post-game content is. You have to specifically go to, like, Chapter 17 and then go through some cutscenes and a random, like, fight against an enemy encounter just to reach Chadley and his post-game missions whenever you want to fight them. Because they're trying to have an open worlds RPG kind of side content in an insanely linear level-based game. You could say, well, that won't happen in the future because this Midgar section was linear in the original and the next part will probably be more open. That argument falls a little flat. The original game's Midgar section still had more openness than this. When you went through an area, you still got random encounters, not just these one-time highly specific encounters that you can't replicate. You could still run around the same area, keep triggering the random encounters or grinding and testing shit out on them and experimenting. And even linear story sections, they're still pretty open in how you could approach them. Like, going through a reactor level is still just triggering random enemy encounters, and you have a lot of influence over which ones you feel like staying and fighting and how many fights you do before continuing the narrative. And frankly, if they wanted to, they could have made it a lot easier to navigate the post-game content or any of the more open sections of the game anyways. They just didn't think to make navigating this content more convenient and natural and just open. If they wanted to make a totally linear game where most, if not all, the combat is predetermined, that's fine, if they want to do that, but the game isn't currently designed around that kind of thinking. Having all of this reversible customization and side content, like filling out your enemy analysis databank, and just the mechanic, like having RPG mechanics, lends me to wonder why they made this so insanely linear at all. Hey, why do we even have levels in the game? I mean, characters leveling up, not like stages, but why do your party members have levels? Seriously, why? I watched a bunch of people play through this game and pretty much everyone was around exactly the same level for all of this same content in the game. Why have different characters have different levels if all the characters share all earned XP? They should have just done it like Bug Fables, where you just have an overall party level, and when the party levels up, you see the stat increases and new moves that you get for each individual character in the party. What am I saying? Why is there a level system at all? I couldn't go through this game at a low level even if I tried to, and in the post-game content you level up to the max of 50 insanely quickly, regardless of what you do if you're doing any of the post-game content. And that's it. There's no point to there being a level system because all players are just going to have the same stats and the same strength pretty much all the time. There are other reasons that this strict linearity is a problem, but we'll come back to them when talking about the general game content. I kind of need to break down the gameplay a little more to get at the heart of the problems with this game being so linear and having such little capacity for self-created content such as extra random encounters. So, what is our next topic? Probably the most important topic after the genre problem. Now, a lot of you might be inclined to think that the genre problem is just some minor, high-concept shit that doesn't really matter. Based on how I watched most people play this game, they probably just do what they think the game expects of them, right? I mean, they scan an enemy, they see, oh, it's weak to fire. They think, oh, I guess we'll shoot him with some fire magic. Let's make it a big fire spell, because fuck it, why not? They make spur-of-the-moment decisions without stepping back and looking at the bigger picture. They might even think that the game is sometimes challenging if they never realize the incredibly easy steps that I already laid out to avoid failure in all situations, and they accidentally create challenge artificially just through their own bad decision-making, like wasting MP on attack spells or wasting ATB when you're going to need it later to heal. The reason why this is a problem is that eventually you will realize the problems in this gameplay. You will eventually see that anytime you died, it was because you did something dumb. Not as in, oh, it punishes you for making mistakes kind of thing, like a Souls game, like, oh, you weren't paying attention to your stamina gauge, or you messed up a dodge or something, but as in, like, if you use the game's own built-in mechanics, you will be fucking yourself over, because the creators didn't put enough thought into the game mechanics to make sure they're all valuable, and they all contribute to a cohesive, gameplay form. Mark my words, if offensive spells literally didn't exist in this game, people would actually think the game was easier. Because people frequently kill themselves by spending all their MP on attack spells and then have none left for healing. That's not the game having challenge, that's the game mechanics being poorly thought out, and the players not thinking critically enough about the mechanics to recognize this lapse in judgment from the game designers. The problem with these, the biggest problem with these genre issues that I've described is if you eventually realize how to actually be better at the game, you have nowhere to go from there. If the next game comes out and has the same mechanics and the same design overarching trends as this one, you'll have nowhere to go. You won't be able to delve any deeper into the mechanics. You'll just be stuck in a situation where you realize that you could literally do exactly the same thing over and over without any improvements to your knowledge or skill, and nothing in the game will actually fundamentally change or reward you for trying harder or exploring the systems more. If the genre problems aren't fixed, then the game will ultimately have an upper limit to how much it can be enjoyed, based entirely on how long it takes someone to realize these basic facts. If you add more mechanics, the complexity and strategic depth and intrigue to the systems, it won't matter. It won't matter if these fundamental problems aren't addressed. What is almost as significant as that, you ask? In fact, the next subject is probably more important to the moment-to-moment just entertainment value of the game. Now, fans might not agree with what I'm about to talk about is the real problem, but none of them, except for the insanely stupid people, would actually argue that the game wouldn't be better off if it fixed the shit that I'm about to describe. Here we go. Clusterfucks. When I think of the combat in this game, I think of the word clusterfuck. Nothing is more apt. Tons of enemies are very mobile, enemy animations aren't very clear, a lot of attacks have very quick startup to the hitbox, enemy movements aren't clear, it's often hard to tell who an enemy is targeting with their attacks, hitboxes are fucked up, the dodge doesn't work very well, and you constantly get punished for trying to dodge things that it really seems like you should be able to dodge. Auto-tracking is insane in this game, and just think about it, just really think about it. You're in situations where you need to worry about the positions and actions of not only maybe 6 or more enemies at once, like think about this relative to another regular action game where you just play as one character, say. 6 or more enemies at you, can be literally all around you, not just in front of you, all around you, but your 3 party members as well. Whatever they're doing, you have to keep track of that, which enemies are aiming at which party members, what they're doing, both your party members and the enemies that may or may not be aiming at any of these particular ones, blah, blah, blah. Admit it, there were a shitload of times where you got hit in the back by an enemy that you didn't even realize was aiming for you or doing an attack that was going to hit you. Times where you looked down at the health bars and thought, when did they get so low? Times where your party members were eating shit and taking hits and you didn't see why it happened or what caused it. Times where you just uttered, what? What the fuck just happened? These fights are clusterfucks. What does it mean to be good at these fights? What is your player influence over this? So much shit happens in these fights that you don't have control over, or you can't realistically be expected to control. Like, hey, did your party member just get hit by an attack that applies poison or frog or some other dangerous status effect? And because you weren't controlling them, you didn't see how it happened, let alone know that it was going to happen in advance and thus try to do something about it to stop it ahead of time? Part of this game's problem is just that beyond following the basic steps I outlined, you don't really have that much control over how well you do in combat a lot of the time. So much shit will happen to you at random that you really couldn't have done anything about. This party member is fucking up, and everyone you aren't controlling is walking straight into an area that's about to have a huge explosion. Some enemy that you have no way of knowing what he was about to do or what he was going to try to attack, suddenly does something and happens to fuck over whatever you were planning at that moment, etc. Shit, I mean, like, the camera is so bad, sometimes flying enemies will just go above your field of vision, and you literally don't have a way of looking at them anymore because your camera won't tilt up. You're going to have to constantly babysit and check in on your allies to make sure you don't need to take, manual control of them or make them avoid something like poison gas or acid traps on the ground or black hole or just any move that does a lot of damage on block that it would be better to dodge and that the party member AI is not smart enough to recognize the danger of. You're going to input actions that miss entirely because without any warning an enemy will just move so quickly through the environment that they just leave the range of your attacks. You'll have to pause the game every half a second in real time just to look around the environment and make sure that every enemy in every part of the fight isn't doing something that you'll need to notice and strategize around. Or else, if you're not going to pause literally like every snap of a finger just to make sure nothing else has changed fundamentally for every single enemy in the fight, if you don't do that, you'll just have to accept that sometimes you'll just get hit by shit that you had no idea was even going to happen. Alrighty. So I thought that I would get... Oh my god, what happened to brightness? I thought it might be a good idea to get some recording data for just random encounters. I mean, like, obviously if I cherry pick any specific instance, alright, so I guess that's what I'm doing right now, because I restarted this just to be able to record it, but I don't have a SES on right now, it doesn't really matter. So let's, like, step by step perceive what is happening in this fight. So first, I don't know much about this enemy type, or let's assume that I don't know anything about this enemy type. Going into it, 3 enemies, I can check. The only way that I'm allowed to check how many enemies there actually are in a zone is if I have ATB, because then I can select a move, and then it shows me a list of all the enemies. Well, okay, that's not true. I can do this automatically, and then I don't need ATB for that, and even if I haven't scanned them, it shows me, so that's not entirely true, but yeah. So, round start this. Okay, what's happening right now? They're not, they don't have any, like, text box attacks, the red text box attacks yet. This one I'm hitting right here has taken a fair amount of damage. But look, already the characters that I'm not controlling, Cloud and Tifa, have taken a pretty substantial amount of damage, relatively speaking. Not insignificant amount of damage for attacks that I didn't even see what happened to them. Can you tell me what happened? if you already know what these enemies do, then yes, you could tell me. But, like, if you don't know anything, did you see what happened to them? I saw damage, and I noticed that it said block, so they were blocking. So that's damage that happened while blocking, which means it would do even more if they weren't blocking, which is insane. For an attack that had no real warning, no startup, no visual indication, nothing like that. They're just these weird, amorphous, like, floating creatures with a tail and arms. They don't really animate very much before they do an attack, so there's really nothing visually clear that's indicating when they're about to attack or anything, especially if they're not, like, it's not the one you're specifically focused on, or it's an enemy that's not specifically focused on your player character. So it's like, my team has taken a not insubstantial amount of damage from nothing. So let's just, now, logically speaking, I feel like you could probably just end this fight extra fast by just spending all your ATB as quickly as possible. However, because the enemies are all flying, it's difficult for a lot of the other moves. Like, if I were to do overpower, maybe that would hit, probably not. None of these moves would probably hit because, again, flying enemies are so poorly implemented into this game that, like, the melee characters just can do fuck all. Cloud has Disorder. Disorder hits pretty high up into the air, but that's pretty much it. And Tifa doesn't have shit that reaches high up, at least not quickly. Star Shower hits pretty high up, but it's super slow startup. By the time you've inputted it, a lot of the times the enemies will just have flown away and are no longer even remotely in the area, so that's not an option either. But anyways, let's do what I would normally do in a new fight. Go Lifesaver on, get the extra, and then now I would usually switch to Tifa at this point, but I don't. It's questionable because, like I just explained, it's debatable how effective I would even be, but whatever. Let's take a look at what's happening. How high does Focus Strike hit? Not very. I remember. It does not hit very high into the air. Now they're doing some move called Psychokinesis. Are they linked? They both did it at the exact same time. Is that, like, does that mean something? I don't know. I don't know how this move works. Switch. And she's finished that. And it doesn't seem like she's hit. Look at the obnoxiousness of the flying enemies. I can't even move my camera higher than this. I'm holding up on the camera. This is the highest that it goes, and yet they can still be above your head in such a way that you literally cannot see them. It's really, really bad. Why can they fly this high up and just leave the combat encounter? Why can they move this quickly through space such so that you can't actually reliably hit them with anything? But anyways, they're doing a move. I don't know what it's going to do. There's no way I can hit them out of it. Okay, a boulder. So see, the problem with that is that, like, there's so many visual. Look at the visual effects that are going on. See this piece of rubble right here in the air, and like this piece of rubble, and these smaller pieces of rubble, and this like dust effect, and like, look at that. Look at okay, this splash effect, like this flashing light. There's some light, yeah, right above Tifa. See this light right here that's like falling down. All these particle effects, other pieces of like bullshit. And especially when you're in this slow motion, it's all desaturated, so it can become even harder to actually perceive what you're looking at. Like, if I didn't already know where Cloud was in this shot, I would probably, like, it would take me a good, like, 10 seconds to figure out where he was, because I can barely see him. So I block that. It did a pretty sizable amount of damage on block. Look at how much damage Barrett has taken. That is purely from Lifesaver. I don't believe he's been hit by another attack, so that's really high damage for just attacks that they can do so quickly into a fight. Can I interrupt him out of this? I have no idea. Ugh. Can he hit anyone? Maybe. Arguably, like, maybe he can do that. But if I do triple slash, he'll probably try to hit the one that's really high in the air and miss, thus wasting some of the attack. There's not really a better attack to go for. I could go for Disorder, but it's not worth doing Disorder when you're not controlling Cloud, because Disorder, part of the benefit of Disorder, not only that it goes into his combo attacks by switching stances to Punisher or vice versa, but the other value in that is Disorder actually builds ATB on hit, unlike most other weapon attack or weapon abilities, which is stunted if you're not the person actively controlling him. So let's go with this. And with Cloud, let's do a magnified regen on all party members. What did I just take damage? What am I getting? Oh, this one was doing an attack. I didn't even see what I mean? Like, there's nothing visually, like, yeah, this psychokinesis thing, yes, it's very visually clear. It has a text box, it says the word, he flies up in the air, which is not visually distinctive because he leaves your camera. Now Cloud has slow on him? Why? Okay, he's getting hit by the same move. Like, why can't you just animate your moves to be, like, visually clear? Like, I had no idea that an attack was coming my way or was going to be happening. I can't even see the projectiles that are coming because they're so tiny. They're just like these little purple circles amidst all of the other particle effects that are constantly going on. They're not visually clear at all. And now I have 2 detrimental status effects, and I've taken even more damage. Look how much damage I've taken from, like, nothing. We're barely into the fight in the slightest. Oh, that's the attack. Look at those. Look at those projectiles. Look at how, like, nothing that is. Like, how would you be able to tell at a glance unless you're staring at it in the slow motion? And again, I didn't even see if he had an animation at the start of that attack. If he does have an animation that is different from all of his other just regular movement animations, it is insanely underpronounced. I would never tell at a glance, or even in slow motion, because if you're looking at it in slow motion, it's really hard to, like, again, it's difficult to see motion. It's hard to just look at a snapshot and see, like, oh, they're in the middle of this move. Like, if an enemy's in the air and you're looking at him in slow motion, it's like, is he moving up? Is he moving down? I can't tell. It's frozen. Nope, I wasn't able to do anything because he just keeps flying away. Alright, whatever. So, that, and we did spend some MP, which is unfortunate. Like, in a longer fight, your MP regeneration, you know, like you just cast regen at the start and you just kind of forget about it. And, it'll recover itself across the board of a fight. But yeah, it's just, like, totally, like, incomprehensible. If I wasn't, like, I usually don't spend that much time pausing and looking around in slow motion or anything. I'm doing this to communicate for an example. But, like, if I was doing that even less, if I was playing more in real time and less in the slow motion, it would be even more incomprehensible. Okay, so there's only 2 of these guys in this one. Oh, okay. That's his animation. That's super insanely small. Like, he just sort of thrusts his arms backwards, and that's supposed to indicate that he's doing a projectile. Again, is he doing an attack? I cannot see if there's a projectile coming at me. Tell me, like, what out of all of these flashing lights is a projectile that's coming my way? There we go. I got hit. I undid the slow-mo version for a little bit. There was indeed a projectile coming my way. You just can't see it, and now I have a status effect on me. Wow. Fucking amazing. Someone just took damage, I think. Because I didn't see anything that hit Barrett. And he just took even more damage. Well, I just got lucky at the end there that the enemy, who can move basically wherever they want to all the time, happened to crowd in the same area and happened to stay there long enough for Tifa to do the entire Star Shower and hit them both with all hits of it. I had no influence over that whatsoever. I just got lucky. I just did this exact encounter like 2 minutes ago or whatever, like before I started recording, and it definitely did not go that way that time. And I would like say input a move, but then like input an attack, but then they would just sort of fly away during the startup of the attack in a way that I couldn't have perceived before I inputted the attack, and thus wasted my ATB and time. It's chaotic. Just do this shit, I guess. Such a fucking clusterfuck. Like, the only reason that I'm able to even tolerate how much of a clusterfuck these fights are, like this, is one, because you're just really overpowered when you use this ATB setup, and two, parry with Tifa, the sliding thing that I keep doing, allows you to move around the stage without getting interrupted. That's another important part. She can't be flinched out of that like she can with her dodge. And it moves faster than everything else. So, you can reposition yourself and, like, get in, like, leave combat and just look at it and see what's happening. Like I'm doing here. Can Cloud triple slash on someone, or will that hit a shield? I think you can probably make two. It's Barrett. Don't hit Barrett. What is happening? God, this is such a fucking embarrassing shit show clusterfuck. God, I can't believe people like this game. What the fuck is happening at any given moment? Star Shower, because it's the only thing that won't get interrupted. No. Okay. Oh, it just hits their shield anyways. Fucking great. Sick. What a fucking... I can't even target the guy that I want.
God, look at how much of just a mindless fucking mess. You tell me the strategy that there is to this shit. You can't fucking see anything. Enemies, allies are moving around all the fucking over the place. It's such a joke. This is an actual joke. This is like, people don't understand the punchline, but it is meant to be comedy. I didn't see the boost go through. So, and again, I just got hit by something a mile away. I have no idea a bunch of these enemies don't just like have long-reaching melee attacks that leap all over the place, or they're just so mobile like these dogs. They could just be anywhere whenever they feel like it, or these obnoxious magic attacks, and I don't know who they're aggroing or anything. All I know is I just sometimes just get interrupted from whatever I'm doing. And, like, there's nothing I can do reliably. This is just so fucking stupid. Again, it's not like this is incredibly easy because you're just... Lifesaver is really broken. These healing items that don't cost MP are really broken. Self-heal boost at low HP is really broken, honestly. Parry with Tifa is really broken. I haven't been able to use the ATB stuff because I haven't been able to do things without getting interrupted so far, but that would usually be really broken. Oh, I just got hit again. I was staring at that slow motion, this same screen for like, talking for like half a minute to a minute straight. I did not see any indication that I was about to get hit by an attack. Did you? Did you fucking see it? What? Were you, like, screaming at the screen? Don't you see? It's so obvious. Look, you're about to get hit. Look, it's so clear. No, of course not. There's nothing fucking visually apparent. It's just dog shit. Is there another? There is. I thought this was the only guy left, but... Punchback. Shower. Let's use them. Go to Punchback again. Another focus strike. Cloud some. Oh, they're starting. What just happened? Why did I? Wait, what? That was like I clanged off of someone's shield, but I didn't. Nothing happened. Oh my god. I can't believe, like, people go through these clusterfuck situations. They're constantly getting dicked in the ass from all sides, and they can't fucking perceive anything or make an actual tactical strategy relative to the positioning or actions of the enemies. And they're like, yep, game's great. It's flashy, so it's great. Some of these problems would be bad in a game where you only play as one character and don't need to worry about enemies being on all sides at you all the time or wondering who an enemy is going to be targeting. They are much worse in a game where your party's well-being can be affected by any of your characters being attacked at any time. Now think about it. Say you're in front of one enemy and you see him preparing a big attack and you have the ability to dodge it. If you get hit, you'll be worse off in the fight. If you block it, not so bad, but still worse off. If you dodge it, you'll avoid it entirely. This is almost the whole point of the fight. He just does a big attack like this, and you can dodge it. Now tell me, what is the point of this as a mechanic if you can just beat it while getting hit every single time, or blocking it every single time? Why even bother dodging it if it doesn't really matter? If the game doesn't really care about whether or not you respond to this situation with the correct action, which would be to dodge it, what is the point?
Now think about that in terms of these big, messy clusterfuck fights where there's just so much actual shit to keep track of every half second that passes, that it's unrealistic for a human to calculate and process all that information all at once, even if they could, because a lot of the times you just don't have the info. Even if you were to watch everything in slow motion every half second, until you've seen all the allies and all the enemies and exactly what's going on at all instances of the fight and what they're respectively doing at that moment in time. If you just get hit by an enemy's big attack from behind or from long range, you couldn't tell what they were doing, who they were aiming at, and it doesn't impact your ability to win the fight, then what's even the point? See, that's the thing. The game knows that it's too much of a clusterfuck to make it so that you'll actually struggle to win if you get hit by a bunch of shit that you didn't and couldn't have seen coming every couple seconds, and if your party members do some stupid shit that you didn't have control over, or because you didn't happen to be babysitting them at every instant. So instead of making it so you can actually have more control over what happens to you, more of an ability to see what's coming and plan accordingly, they just make it so none of this crap matters. Who cares if you got hit by a shitload of times and, things that don't make sense, or you couldn't even see what was going to happen to you, or you couldn't tell who was being aimed at? Who cares? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what happens in the fight, because none of it is enough to give you any real trouble. You, as the player, can't really, just play the game better and somehow avoid getting hit by all of this bullshit that you can't see coming from these nonsense clusterfuck fights. So they can't just tell you to play the game better. Instead, the game is just easy. You can do whatever the fuck you feel like all the times. Even you fanboys know that this clusterfuck shit is insanely annoying. You have definitely felt the annoyance when you're getting knocked out of all of your attacks, and even if you try to plan ahead to avoid that from happening, it's just futile. You know that it's annoying. I've watched the footage. I've seen you people get annoyed. You know it's annoying. When you don't understand what is happening, when you're completely confused as to what's happening or why or what just happened, when a party member off screen takes a big hit and you didn't even see what it was, you know that that is annoying. Again, Baby's first game design, basic rules of strategy. Provide the player with all of the information, and then make that the point of the gameplay to see how well the player can compute all of that information into a comprehensive, sound, logical strategy. Strategy is about giving the player a lot of complex information and systems knowledge that bounce off of each other, and seeing if he or she can really equate a good plan out of it. When you have a giant clusterfuck where almost everything significant that happens is something that more or less happened without much of a warning, or happened off screen, or you had no control over it as the player, that's not strategy. That's just nonsense hitting nonsense. That's just shit hitting the wall. This is all a matter of very important part of game design. Okay, it's communication. Communication with the player is a vital part of gameplay that permeates every aspect of a game, and this game has some dog shit communication. Let me give you some quick examples of different types of communication. Alrighty, so straightforward communication. I mean, this is a single player game where you're just one character, and you're just looking at the enemies, but even still, it has a basic degree of communication and a basic degree of trust regarding that communication. Like an enemy, the enemy sort of floats over to me at a consistent speed and then all of a sudden just stops, right? Around that range. That communicates to me something. That distinct change in motion communicates that he is at around his current range and that he'll start to act. God, he keeps getting stuck there. He has a little bit of an animation. It's not very pronounced, but I mean, so long as you're looking at him, you'd be able to tell the animation. But yeah, it's just basic communication. You understand exactly how it works just from looking at it. Other forms of communication, you have the very basic communication of just general game feedback. You have the sound effects and visual effects. This tells you about how far the attack reaches, really obvious shit, so it gives you an assumption as to where the hitbox is. You get communication in the terms of basic feedback, just from the responsiveness of the controls. You tap left, you go left, you tap right, you go right. The game is immediately responsive and has the appropriate visual effect to communicate to you whether you have done something good or bad. So let's get hit by an attack. And and there was an appropriate amount of feedback. I currently have the thing equipped that does a counterattack whenever I take damage, so that's why it immediately killed him, but there's a very clear game communication when you have received damage that it's a negative experience. You are being informed by the game, by the sound effects, by the visual effects of what you should be doing. Let's look at this guy. You could argue that that's not perfect communication if you wouldn't already know that he's going to explode, but I mean the nature of the character design is an attempt to communicate this game function. And especially when you attack him, he does a unique thing that other enemies don't, that you would notice that is different from other enemies in their dying animations, where he starts to vibrate and he starts to spew more and more smoke. This is communicating danger, even without knowing already ahead of time what it does. Since you don't have a block button in this game, most of the attacks that you can do, or most of the things that will damage you, are things that are either very short-ranged or that you can see them in advance. If you're approaching an enemy that you don't know how they function yet or what their moves are yet, you know that you can at least get a certain distance away from them and be relatively safe to do so. So let's test that theory out. So I know that if I approach this enemy, he doesn't, he won't just suddenly attack me. I keep an appropriate amount of distance away around the length of my weapon, right? That's where I space myself usually to enemies, is you know how long your own weapon reaches, and therefore you know how close you can get to an enemy. So I know that I can just sort of sit here and be fine, right? I know the appropriate spacing. The game has communicated that thoroughly. And if there is an attack that hits longer than that from an enemy, so, that communicates to me that I can just approach an enemy and be fine. What about this big guy? He has a bigger attack that reaches much further. Now I can sort of walk out of the way, but it's a little bit tight. I can't jump out of the way because it hits too high into the air. So that's not a really viable option. Oops. It's been a second. Alright, well, whatever. And so the game, for a longer reaching attack like that, has a little bit more startup. He bends his arm back. You can see mostly from the length of his weapon and such about how long he'll reach. This enemy too, yes, he has a longer reaching attack, but I mean it has a clear enough startup, and he only triggers it when you get around this range. It would only be unreactable if you were significantly closer to him. So if you still stay around this distance, it gives you plenty of warning ahead of time that communicates its game function so that you can get out of the way and act appropriately. And there's constant communication with every time you hit him. Imagine what it would be like if you fought this enemy type, or if you fought enemies in this game, but when you swung the weapon there was no sound effect, there was no blood or hit effects that come off of the enemies. It was just this regular effect, except that you have to just trust that the enemy took damage from it, because there was no other communication. Imagine how awkward and weird and unclear that would be. Not to mention unsatisfying, because communication is largely Pavlovian. It gives you a satisfying indication through sound effects, visual effects, to communicate to you that you did your job correctly, or that you messed something up and need to adjust something. Right? It gives you clear indications that immediately, trigger positive or negative responses. So now we have an enemy with a longer attack range, and he has an appropriate amount of startup animation to communicate that. The range that he triggers, especially when he backs off like that, it does a good job of communicating that his next attack is probably going to be a long-ranged one. And you can handle it appropriately because the game is adequately communicating to you all the information that you need. Even when you can see what's happening, it's not clear what the game is trying to teach you a lot of the time. See, like, say you see a move name appear above an enemy's head. Does that properly communicate the threat or nature of that move if you don't already know what it does? Before you get hit, could you have seen the startup of the attack and mostly understand how it works? Alright, let's use a specific example, okay? If Abzu goes on the wall, does this communicate how this move works? Does this communicate how to avoid this move or what to do? Let's test that out. Cutscenes. Yes. More loading screens. The weirdest parts are when there's like two cutscenes, like actual skippable cutscenes back to back for no reason. You could have just combined them all and had one loading screen instead of two. Alrighty. I'm not gonna like, dawdle around. I don't think it'd be cash money to pretend like I'm not. Oh, right. I have this thing on. Whatever. Blah blah. Alright, how do we dodge this? Okay, I hit the dodge button, but it didn't dodge it. That hitbox is massive. So yeah, we're gonna approach this as like, okay, see the moves, what do we do about them? Well, that didn't work very well. There. I'm just gonna lunge. I tried to dodge, didn't work. Bash and smash, so he can approach me. Now he'll either do 2 reps of this. Okay, so I can just do that, no problem. He auto-tracks really hard, but I mean, it's fine. You can just run around. It's not like you're trapped in a hallway. So that's, easy enough to avoid that one. Okay, so now he's up there. Gonna try to dodge. Didn't work. Again, tell me how in the fuck I'm supposed to dodge that. Just like, I'm not... What's the point? Nope, it definitely didn't block that. But his charge clanged off. Wow, so charge gets interrupted by Lustrous Shield. That's wild. That's pretty cool. I don't mind that. Again, it's just like a shot in the dark whenever you use Lustrous Shield. It's like, will this actually block against something or won't it? It's a complete toss-up, coin flip, but... Oh, he was looking in that direction, but then he suddenly charged in this direction. I'm guessing it didn't seem to be at my player character, so I don't even know who he was aiming at. I guess he's just aggroing a Tifa, but again, I don't know how I was supposed to know that in order to, like, know where to avoid him, because again, he didn't charge where he was facing, he didn't charge towards me. How was I supposed to know where to position myself or which character to take control of to get them out of the way in time? I don't know. Alrighty. Oh. I remember that. I do distinctly remember this, yes. The name of the move is Triple Charge, but he actually can do 4 charges in a row. That is hilarious. Peak game communication. Smashing dodge, yes. In a non-cardinal direction. Even then, if I wasn't like so over-leveled for this current juncture, like my party members still got hit by that. I wasn't controlling them. All of my action had to be put into like getting my own character to avoid the attack, and even then I don't think that would be consistent if I were to try it again. But one of my sub-characters that I couldn't have been controlling at the exact same time as my player character just got hit and now has a detrimental status effect that will like cost MP to fix, or a chakra, which I don't have on that character, or anything like that. Like, it's... And it's such a huge detriment. Like, why did I even bother avoiding it with my character if just another one of my party members got hit by it anyways, by pure fucking chance? Because they didn't get out of the way of it, that I had no influence over. It is the exact same detriment as if my player character were to have gotten hit by it. If I didn't get out of the way of it, it's literally exactly the same negative situation. So, like, what's the point? Why even bother trying to avoid things with your player character if just your sub-characters that you couldn't have also been micromanaging? And look, all this damage on block, if I wasn't over-leveled, that'd be a lot of damage. So those appear to strike near the center, I guess. Or I don't know, I kind of forget how those work, if I ever figure it out. Okay, dodging way... I still got hit. Whatever. Dodging way earlier at around like that angle, I guess, seemed to avoid it. Let's try it again. Nope, dodged really early and still got hit. Which one dodges? Dodge way early, didn't work. I don't know if Cloud can dodge that reliably. And then look, how was I supposed to micromanage all of that? Look, Eris got hit again. Like, for fuck's sake, I'm trying to figure out even how to avoid it with like my player character consistently. Let's try to get to the edges again. Yeah, just like sort of dodge consistently in a adjacent manner. So that seems pretty consistent, but maybe not if I'm like right next to him. Let's try this. So he starts doing the move. Okay. If I'm again right next to him. God, they're suicidal. They really want to just kill themselves. Nope. I tried mashing dodge, but I was already trapped because there was another one that was blocking my exit there, and there was no way for me to avoid that. Just by the happenstance of where they spawned, which was... I don't know if it's clear enough for you to be able to plan in advance around that fact. Probably not. You probably just sometimes just get hit by that and have no way to really avoid it. It's randomly, like, worked out that time. Again, just incredibly inconsistent, incredibly clunky. Just happened to work. Not gonna be able to replicate it in that way, but yep, maybe I'll give that a shot. Okay, so first I want to see what the AI does. So they all dodge away. Yeah, and they all just dodge them, I guess. But sometimes they fuck up. So that's how that works. Yeah, I was gonna say I didn't want both of them to get hit, so I might as well get her out of the way since she first. She just changed targets. Oh my god, yeah, I can't tell who he's aiming at because he's not aiming at who he's facing. He just, at the very last second, he just decides to face in a different direction. Wait, is he gonna do a fourth charge even though the move is called triple charge? Amazing. That is some Kino fucking communication. You fucking idiot. I couldn't even have... there was literally no way for me to get them out of the way in time. They were already too screwed in where they were positioning themselves. Which, again, I have no control over. I am just controlling one character at a time. Well, as I described, a lot of the times whether or not you can avoid something or you get hit or your party members get hit is purely pretty much just RNG, just outside of your control. Just the dice happen to land in such a way that you are completely screwed over, and that's pretty much the game. A lot of moves have warning, but that warning is useless, because the warning is just the enemy charging up the attack. It's unclear who the enemy is targeting, it's unclear when they'll release the attack, and by the time that you can see the motion, it's way too fast, and you're not allowed to act accordingly. However, sometimes bad communication is as simple as just straight up badly communicating. Descriptions in this game are poorly written all over the place. I think most people are in agreement on that again, no? A lot of the text is just odd or like outright lying to you. Tell me, did you read the synergy materia description and say, I get how this works, and then use it correctly? How long was it before you noticed that the ice materia doesn't actually hit enemies very well because it doesn't track them at all and has a huge delay on the actual attack? The assess materia is frequently useless too. Take these like monodrone, whatever things that apply a barrier and reflect on themselves shortly into a fight. The assess tells you that they need to be pelted with magic before they can be hit by physical attacks. It's basically explicitly what it says. This is a lie. Okay? They take a few hits, quickly apply some sort of shield on themselves, which is only visible through the sometimes hard to see like sheen glowing sphere around them, okay? For which a slight difference in the hexagonal pattern that is used on the shield is the only thing that you can use to determine if it's the physical resistant wall or the magic resistant wall. And it doesn't even have like an icon to communicate this. And then you need to use the opposing damage type to break it. That is not what the assess materia said. That is completely wrong. The UI doesn't communicate everything that you need it to. For example, Barrett's overcharge isn't visible unless you're playing as him, and even then, you can't see it from the battle menu. You have to unpause. Tifa's time remaining on her current chi level isn't visible. Which moves you've already done for the current set of 3 skills necessary to trigger the skill master materia isn't visible anywhere. Like, come on. If I have skill master on all 3 characters, am I really gonna, personally memorize exactly which ATB moves I've used with each character since the start of every fight, and in which order too? Does Skillmaster, reset on death of a character? I have no idea. It might. Nothing will actually show me the current state of any character's Skillmaster materia, so I don't fucking know. Yet, another thing that I'd have to go out of my way to painstakingly test by annoyingly trudging to the Corneo Cup or something to just try out that exact situation and just get the answer to that question. Again, the assess materia is just so worthless in this game. I mean, if the game taught you things that were important to know in other ways, it'd be fine. Like, for example, did you know that if you hit Abzu or one of the spear lizard guys with enough fire damage, they get caught on fire and they actually have to remove themselves from the fight by cooling off for a bit in the nearby water of the sewer levels? I didn't know that because I almost never use magic, especially not defensive magic, and because I had been taught by the game that doing so was not very useful and it was a waste of MP. And even when I hit them with just low strength fire magic, it wasn't enough fire damage to trigger this special state. So I tried fire magic that they are weak to. It wasn't really worth it from what I saw, so I didn't bother doing it again. Like a sane, rational human being capable of basic thought. That is what I did. If I had known that I could render a Sahagin unable to fight for quite a long time just by hitting him with some fire magic, stronger fire magic, yeah, I probably still wouldn't have used it on them because it's still not cost effective as just not spending MP, but still, that is a unique interaction that may have tactical benefits in certain situations that would be handy to know about so that you can make smarter, more complex decisions in gameplay. What is the lesson there? Try anything and everything on every single enemy you might encounter in the game just to test whether or not there's some secret benefit that occurs, because the game won't just tell you important information like that. I already knew ahead of time that, say, using rays on a ghost would instant kill it, but again, the game doesn't tell you that. Some things, you just have to stare at the numbers that pop up off of an enemy when they're hit to figure things out, like literally with a calculator in hand. Like, when examining an enemy, it doesn't tell you how much health they have unless you use the assess materia on them. And even if they're an enemy type that you've already assessed before. I wanted to know, say, exactly how much damage every single one of Tifa's moves did, how much damage was added from a critical hit, how much damage was added from the Star Shower, which multiplies the damage of the next action taken, and so I sat there in fucking slow motion, watching each of the damage numbers pop off from the enemy for every hit of Star Shower, or for every hit of Rise and Fall, recording each number on a little paper notepad, and that's what I had to do just to get accurate information on how much damage things did relative to each other. There has to be a better way of telling the player how much total damage a multi-hit move is doing. Why not tell me the exact percent chance of critting in the menu, or exactly how much damage will be added from a critical hit? Another little annoyance, it's not always immediately apparent to tell which direction you have to switch. You have to hit on the pad to switch to a party member you want. I constantly fuck this up by switching to the wrong party member, and I know for a fact I definitely was not alone in that. Now granted, I think you should be able to switch characters in the frozen time, and when you do, so there shouldn't be any time lag when you do that. But even so, a more prominent indicator somewhere on the screen that just like fucking screams at you, Barrett is on the right, Tifa's on the left, would have been nice. And do not lie to me and tell me that you never fucked this up. I've seen the footage. Every last one of you fucked this up all the time, just like me, until I sat down and memorized the exact order of different combinations of party members and which one was to the left or right at every time. I forget if I already mentioned this or not, but the game should also show you how close you are to knocking an enemy into the pressured state, where you can ramp up their stagger gauge. You know, when they're knocked down, it says pressured under their stagger gauge. It's hilarious that you're allowed to see the stagger gauge and how close they are to getting staggered, but for a huge number of enemies and bosses, especially, you don't get to see the gauge beneath that gauge that determines when the enemy gets pressured to allow you to do anything to the stagger gauge. It's super fucking stupid. I just keep, frequently I would just keep swinging away and an enemy think, do another ATB move, I guess. Surely I must be close to knocking them down by now, right? It has to happen eventually, but I just don't know because I can't see that gauge. In general, the way a lot of enemy actions and behaviors currently work needs to be changed to allow them to effectively communicate information before the player no longer has the option to act on the communication or learn anything from it. But a good starter for how to improve the game is just to take the massive amount of information that you'd want to keep straight at all times, like where all the enemies and allies are, who is aggro on who, and what they're doing and how they're moving, and just put it all into immediately consumable data. At a certain point, the player needs to be able to play the game without pausing every microsecond to check and see if there's something he needs that calls his attention, something he's not currently looking at that has fundamentally changed. This is what I would do. Having blatant red arcing lines, like arcing red lasers drawn from every enemy to every ally, or every enemy to whatever ally they are currently aggroed on, and have the nature of the laser reflect what they're currently doing. Like, this also needs to come with a more clear understanding of aggro, because how an enemy chooses who to aggro is pretty inconsistent in this game. Some enemies are guaranteed to aggro the player character, others, I don't fucking know. Right now, the most fun enemies to fight are the ones that do just beeline for the player character, because at least you know who they'll aggro at all times, and because you know that, you can strategize around that. You can use that to your advantage. You can plan ahead of time. You can switch to the tank character and then immediately switch off once the aggro has been started in order to hit the boss in the back while someone else while the boss is in recovery or still going through their attack animation, for example. Enemy actions should be designed with an understanding that you are managing all party members against all enemies all at the same time. So if an enemy can say start up a move in the blink of an eye and then suddenly be shooting poison smoke or some shit, or just a move with hit stun that'll knock you out of an ATB move or anything, okay, that sucks ass. That's garbage game design. That's so bad. Enemy actions should have more warning, more clear communication, and a gameplay function, the communication of both gameplay function and threat, okay? Just give the player the info they need when they need it, and give them the leeway to act based on that information, as well as the ability to direct party members in advance so that you don't find yourself in a shitty situation that happened completely outside of your control because your allied party members were positioning themselves or acting stupidly. I don't care if that means just flashing like a billion red warning signs that would appear at the edge of your screen or near closer to the center of your screen every couple of seconds. Each warning sign, like say with a prominent, for example, have a yellow warning sign appear when a kind of strong move is being used by an enemy that isn't aggroed personally on the character you're controlling. A red sign appears when it's something more dangerous, and maybe there's some other indicator that indicates whether or not it's a blockable attack or an unblockable attack, for example. And just give that information all the fucking time, okay? And then by communicate, you need to warn the player, grab their attention if it's something that they might not be currently paying attention to in real time, and then give them enough information so that they can decide whether or not they want to act on that information. If it's just like some really weak minor attack, like a foot soldier just doing a regular volley of bullets at some enemy or at some party member you're not currently controlling, communicate that it's a very low level of threat and that you probably don't need to pay that much attention to it. You can just ignore it. And one issue I often run into in this game is that the enemy move text boxes don't disappear fast enough. Like, when I'm looking at an enemy in the frozen time with a text box above their head, I often don't know if they've just finished doing that move or if they're about to start doing that move. Make the text box appear earlier and disappear faster. There are so many moves that are so stupidly fucking fast, the red text box literally appears after you've already been hit and taken damage from the move in question. What is the point of... Here's the name of the move you just got hit by. Eat shit. But in terms of this warning system that I'm envisioning, which is just one potential solution out of an infinite number of solutions, it doesn't have to be this exact thing I'm describing. It should give you, colored warnings whenever an action is being taken by an enemy in the fight based on the level of threat. I know the red text boxes are kind of meant to do that, but they're often not very eye-catching if it's something off-screen. You'd have to read the text box to see if it's something worth paying attention to. Half the moves that are serious threats in the game don't have text boxes at all, so it's not even a good system for giving you warning over stuff that you'd want to be warned about. And the fucking red text box, in addition to not being very eye-catching to really grab your attention for emergency situations, it gets covered up by other elements like the UI elements or your health bars / covers up enemy health bars. But yeah. If it were going to say, give you warnings on your screen for every action that's about to happen they're not currently looking at, and when you pause and look over and it has the red lines to show you exactly who's being aimed at, and maybe it has a little subtle hologram on the floor to show you the range or the area of the move that it's going to have a hitbox in where it's going to hit, and whether or not it is an unblockable action, like I said. But then, when you see it, you can just, tap a button or something while looking at that enemy to disregard that warning and make it go away so that you know that it's already been dealt with. Mentally speaking, you can react to the next major threat that pops up in your danger notification system. Now, I know that what I'm describing here as this potential solution to the clusterfuck fights sounds like it would be overwhelming, with all sorts of red lines and hologram graphics and warning signs popping up all the fucking time. It sounds like it would possibly be ugly or ruin the aesthetic of fights or anything, but that's the thing. These are all UI elements that I'm describing. These are all things that the player could be allowed to turn off in the menu if they wanted to. Want to view the game through the regular lens with no added visual effects to give you useful information? You can do that just fine and continue getting dicked in the ass like an idiot if that's your thing. it would just help the gameplay improve for people who actually want to take gameplay seriously and genuinely push the strategy as far as it'll go. As for the clusterfuck part of the conundrum, because even if the game is adjusted with a better communication, better understanding of how information is there in a fight and how the player might want to take account to, form an intelligent strategy around, there's still just a matter of, the game just has, unfair and kind of moronic design choices. For example, party members, you have to trust them to not get themselves killed while you aren't personally controlling them, and sometimes they just don't do a good job. See, now, I don't think the solution is to just make the party member AI smarter. I disagree with that mentality. Yes, it is annoying that the AI is so stupid that it won't think to get out of the way of a smogger's poison gas attack, or not run into a giant explosion. But I don't agree that much of anything in the game should be decided by your party member's AI. I mean, it's a video game. The point is that you play it. How well you do should depend on you, the fucking player, not just how smart your companion AI is. If the AI is smart enough to avoid everything correctly without your input, then why are you playing? Why do anything as the player? If you need to defend against something, just switch off that character and let the AI take care of it if they're smart enough to do so. No, that's not testing the player's abilities, that's just playing the game for you. The game should instead be about management, like in how, say, Mass Effect 2. Your allies will do some things, but they're pretty stupid. However, you can give them very specific orders for what to do, where to position themselves in cover-based shooter fights, and dynamically change that as the fight progresses. And doing this well will drastically improve how the allies support you and contribute to the fight. You did that, not the AI. You were the one who strategized better by managing your party. In the same sense, I have some simple propositions for this game. The first is obvious. I mean, this also has to do with basic communication, but let the player see the camera from the point of view of the other characters in the frozen time. Technically, you can do this if you go out of your way to go into their menus and try to use an attack, and then use that, and that'll switch the camera to a viewpoint, but that's limited to only giving you a fixed camera on each target that you can use the, whatever you action, either attack or defensive ATB moves on. And this is also obnoxious because you need ATB on the character to even be able to do that and get the camera from their perspective. Allow the player to issue basic commands for where allies should be hanging out in a fight, if they should just sit tight and defend in one spot. Allow the player to issue multiple commands at once without leaving the frozen time like it currently does, obviously. And of course, also let the player issue simple commands immediately, such as to dodge in a direction, without needing to take manual control over that character in order to make them dodge. And if you do take manual control over the character, make it happen with zero time lag, an instantaneous transfer. You could probably take those ideas and just compare them to your own experiences of not having info, something not being clear, being confusing, not knowing what the fuck just happened, and so on, and add your little own things that you would want to be able to do to manage party members, or just reduce the rate at which you need to already know something in order to develop a counter strategy against that sort of shit. And making sure that communication actually extends over a period of time that would be necessary relative to the threat and nature of whatever's being communicated. Obviously, basic game design shit. So, let's move on to game direction. Fights generally lack direction. You just kind of do whatever. You hit the enemy with what you feel like most of the time. Let's look at Barrett for an example. Let's deep dive into his actual strategy. Just looking at his toolkit, what direction are we given to make strategic, smart decisions based on how his tools work? Obviously, his lifesaver is stupid good in a party, and Steelskin does a very minor decrease in the damage that you take, but it's mainly good for making it so his moves do not get interrupted. Except that's kind of a lie on the game's part because he still gets interrupted by some moves, but not others, which it gives no real indication as to which moves will still interrupt you during Steelskin. Whatever, game sucks. Okay, so if you're in a clusterfuck or just against aggressive enemies that you don't know when you'll be hit by their attacks, Steelskin is very useful too, so that you don't get knocked out of moves and waste ATB or overcharge that you might have activated. His overcharge starts maxed out, so it's very obvious that you should use it right away in every fight. when you do his normal attack all the way, or when you do one of his weapon abilities, or any of the yellow materia skills, you can hit triangle for a faster pump of his overcharge. In general, I think this is probably good to do in most circumstances. If the enemy is like underground or invisible, like the ghost enemies where they disappear for a little bit, or anytime where you're not actively able to do anything, it's probably a good opportunity to do the slower pump of his overcharge, just to get something out of the time that you spend waiting. His overcharge does good damage and hit stun to most enemies, but as a unique attack it's also good for building ATB, which means that if you do his overcharge when your ATB is already full, you are just wasting a full bar of ATB or more that you could have built, so don't do that. However, most of his weapon abilities take a fair amount of time to come out. If you do, say, Maximum Fury, or whatever it's called, with the 2 ATB bars, it takes quite a long time to finish the animation, which means that if your overcharge is already full when you first activated it, then that is also a waste, because you could have been spending that entire duration of that attack to build back overcharge if it wasn't already full. This means that you never want to be caught with both full ATB and full overcharge with Barret, because that means that you fucked up in your planning and you're not being optimal. If you find yourself in this situation, though, it is better to spend the ATB first than it is to spend the overcharge first, since the small amount of overcharge that would have built up during the duration of that move is nothing compared to the nearly full bar of ATB that you would generate by using overcharge on an enemy. Barret's regular attack isn't very strong. You have to do it consistently for quite a while before he does the thing that does the more damage and impact at the very end of the volley, which can be cancelled also into the fast pump. It also doesn't build ATB terribly fast, but since it's easy to pepper enemies, and it's very low risk since you can stop shooting and just block or dodge at pretty much any time, it's worth doing most of the time. And also, his big shot thing builds the stagger gauge. So use that. I forget what it's called exactly, but the one that increases the stagger. Use that when the enemy is knocked down and you want to stagger them, obviously. The Fury move is good for dealing damage at longer range, but this is where we come to the question of optimization and game direction, because now we come to a variety of actions and decisions that seem to all basically achieve exactly the same thing. Let me ask you this. Is it better to just use the regular attack with Barret to build ATB and then get the fast pump at the end of it to build some extra overcharge? Or is it better to spend the entire time doing the slow pump for the overcharge to get overcharge done faster, and then just use the overcharge since it does so much more damage and is so much faster than the regular attack would? And which one would build more ATB over that period of time? Can you tell me, mathematically, which choice is better? I can't. Like, which one will deal more DPS over T amount of time? Which one builds more ATB over T amount of time? I'll bet you have no idea the exact breakdown to which of those two options is the better choice of strategy. That's the problem. Both choices aren't really functionally different enough for you to ever be confident in knowing which choice is the best in any particular situation. You may or may not be. One actually might be better than the other, but you don't know which one that is. You have no direction. You are aimless. You just pick the one that you feel like doing or that you feel like is a better choice, but you don't actually have a solid tactical reason for, say, choosing regular attack volleys over going all in on using overcharge only. You probably just assume that the regular attack is better. I know that's why I made the choices I made. I didn't like doing the slow pump for the overcharge if the fast pump exists, but that led me to almost never using the slow pump at all, and I don't know if it would have been mathematically better choice to do the slow pump in more situations than I ended up doing it or not. Let's take another example. Say you're low on overcharge but high on ATB, and you're fighting enemies that you can reach on the ground. What do you do? Actually, what do you do? Like, what is logically, tactically speaking, the choice that you make? Let's say you already have Steel Skin and Lifesaver on, so don't even worry about that. Regen, anything else that you would want at the time. What do you do? Do you do Maximum Fury, because it deals high damage with your 2 ATB, how much damage does that deal, actually? How much damage would it deal compared to, say, doing point blank with both of those 2 ATB slots? Do you choose point blank? What about charging uppercut to build some of that extra overcharge a little bit faster? Is it more valuable to do that instead and then get closer to another overcharge, which will also deal high damage and build back quite a lot of ATB? Seriously, which option do you pick? Mathematically, do you even have any idea which of those choices is actually the most logical and effective? They're all basically means of dealing damage at the end of the day. Like at some point along the line, they will deal damage. There is a path for each choice that you could take to deal damage. It's just unclear which one would be more in any situation. If you're doing uppercut into building more overcharge, if that is the best choice, with the added damage of the overcharge and the extra ATB gain that you get, then what is even the point of point blank existing? When would you use that skill as opposed to another skill? I would probably say use uppercut when the overcharge gauge is at exactly the right level to just barely be ready to go when the uppercut builds, and maybe the fast pump after the uppercut, or when the enemy is staggered or close to being staggered, because if you use overcharge in a staggered enemy, it's more valuable than it is when you hit a normal enemy, because it builds extra ATB when hitting a staggered enemy, because it's a unique attack, quote-unquote. I'd do point blank over maximum fury if I had the choice of either, since it's faster recovering, and I believe it does more damage in one lump sum hit, but I literally don't know, which makes it easier to try to guess, when the enemy is going to get knocked down if all the damage just hits them all at once. It's more predictable and easier to figure out when they're going to get into a pressured state if they're the enemy type that goes into their pressured state from straight damage output. And that's more or less my main point. When you pick an action, any action in this game, even tiny actions like dodging this way or doing this regular attack or unique attack or anything, do you have a sound strategic reason for picking that action as opposed to doing any other action that might accomplish pretty much the same goal? Or are you just doing whatever the fuck you feel like, whatever feels right? That's what I mean. A shitload of this game lacks direction because so many choices are so similar in what they ultimately accomplish and how much value they present, and there aren't, more mechanics that give you a sense of direction to inform you as why you might make one decision over another and give you more variables and information to consider when making a tactical choice in a fight. Seriously, tell me, what you have these resources with Barrett. Do you do point blank? Do you do maximum fury? Why? What is your game plan? What will be the best? Why? Tell me which option is better. So this game has tactical choices in the form of, if you know what the next fight will involve, you can reslot your materia to be more suited to whatever strategy will be more effective in that particular fight. But in combat, there is not a lot. It's very aimless, and most of the time it's just you mashing your attacks against the enemy as they blip around the stage and mash their attacks against your party. Most players in this game just fuck around and do whatever. I did that. I saw everyone else doing that. That's what they do. They don't try very hard to avoid taking damage. In that sense, I at least tried harder than most players. They don't make decisions to optimize their DPS. They just do whatever. Get hit here and there, whatever. Do this attack here and there. Which attack, it doesn't really matter. Just do an attack that will land, whatever. Heal when they take a lot of damage or when a party member gets knocked out, whatever. There isn't much direction because the game doesn't have much direction to it, mechanically speaking. You can't realistically manage all the enemy info all at once and avoid everything cleanly that you're technically allowed to avoid or block. And even if you could, your party members will still screw you over sometimes, regardless of what you do. And at the end of the day, it's just a game where you do whatever you feel like. At that point, mechanically, it's not action strategy or RPG, since there's actually no skill set that you're consistently rewarded for developing in this game. And this is important because game design needs to have direction to it. Players need a sense of direction. They need to understand the reason why they would choose one thing over another thing. Even if their reasoning is shallow or perhaps lacking the finer details, they still need a reason. Yeah, the reasons don't need to be about what's more optimal. Like, take Tifa combo videos, for example. The vast majority of those combo videos, their combos are really not practical, since they waste a lot of time and resources on one opponent that already needs to be weak enough to be able to get launched and juggled into those states. They don't make you better at the game, but one player might choose one action over another just because it's cool or fun or whatever. And I get that, okay? But in long term, the player needs to feel like they are improving. The player needs to feel like they are, like, deepening their understanding of the mechanics, that they are not exactly the same as they were when they started the game. And like the gameplay is evolving with them. Luckily, since this is an RPG where you unlock new moves and get stronger pretty much the whole game, this game doesn't lack a sense of progression per se, because you are still getting new shit. But in terms of how you make choices in the gameplay, you're still not really growing or changing much, since so much of the time you don't have a solid reason for why you're choosing to do this thing or that thing in gameplay, why you're choosing to do this particular ATB move, why you're choosing to spend ATB at this particular juncture or anything. You know, there's only certain situations where you're like, yes, I understand exactly what I should do based on the mechanics. Yes, I should use my move that increases stagger to an enemy that's going to get staggered or is pressured state. Like, those situations, players are so eager to do because they know that based on the game direction and the mechanics, that it is the smart choice. And most of the time, no matter, even if you stop and think about it for an hour, there is not a smart choice to make, because all the choices seem like they might, or they could be better, or they could be worse. When the player understands why they would do one thing or another, they can start to deepen their gameplay, start to optimize their choices, start putting the pieces together, and understand why they choose to do this here and that there, and as such, they feel a sense of progress and change. And yeah, this is going to be different for everyone. Like, I was watching people play FF7R that only near the very end of the game even started to think about making sure to use focus thrust when an enemy is pressured. Like, putting the basic pieces together of what to do where. And, you know, that can be slower for some and faster for other players. But even so, this game still lacks so much direction to almost every moment, every second of play. It's also not like, you know, a game should have just one correct choice for every situation. There should be some freedom, but that freedom is for experimentation, to find a reason to make choices, and to develop a style per se. Good game design gives players at least some sense of direction, and then gives them the tools to find out even more direction and meaning out of the choices they make with the tools that they're given. So, how would the game give direction through its mechanics? Well, like I said, if it had all of the information it truly needs to allow you to manage all the shit that they put into the game, and you could give party members simple commands of how to move and where to position themselves and how to dodge certain things, that you weren't undone by factors that you can't control, then it'd be a lot better of an action strategy game just by that, and, you know, obviously rebalancing around the MP so that attack magic was more worthwhile and it's actually incorporating the genres that it tries to. But yeah. And if just all the magic was made more vital to the core gameplay, so that not spending MP is obviously a greater cost than the cost of spending some MP, resource management would be better, everything I just said. But let me give you an example of how it could implement direction to your decision-making, tactics, reasons to pick one choice or another. Take Final Fantasy 15. Not a great game, in my opinion, but it does have one vital mechanic that drives almost all of your choices in combat. Ironically, not many people I've talked to or seen play FF15 actually even know that this mechanic exists, despite its importance to the game design. What is it that I'm talking about? Well, when you attack an enemy's backside in FF15, you have a high % chance that you'll trigger a move with one of your allies nearby. When this move triggers, not only is it stronger than regular attacks and also safer since you're invincible during the duration of the animation, but it also has the added benefit of increasing how quickly your ally abilities charge. When, say, Gladio gets his big area sweeping attack faster, it's better, since you can deal more damage to a crowded area much faster, you can interrupt enemies with it, and you can sit on it and wait to trigger it when Gladio's in trouble, because it also makes him invincible during the duration of that attack. This one mechanic gives you direction in fights. This tells you, hey, if X, then Y. Okay, if you hit enemies in the back, then you are drastically rewarded with more resources and more powerful moves. Okay, so that means when an enemy is facing me, I should leave my, use my handy warp strike, go far away to some other enemy that isn't looking at me, and hit them in the backside until they aggro me. all while making use of the partner abilities that I'm generating while doing so that I can build them back up again. This one mechanic suddenly tells you more or less what you should do in a fight. Zip around with a long-range warp strike, which is also designed for this since it deals more damage the further it travels to attack, and hit enemies who are aggroed to your allies in the backside a bunch. That's the entire game. It's not a complex game, but because you do have direction, you have an idea of what you're supposed to do, you can focus on doing it and get better and better, and you don't feel this sense of aimlessness like you just do whatever and never develop a real strategy for anything. Now, let's look at an example from this game. I'd say the biggest mechanic that gives you some direction would be found in two specific materia, optional things that you can add to your characters, which are, as I said in the earlier video, ATB Assist and Skill Master. You can get Skill Masters for the whole party, but there's only one ATB Assist materia in the game, and rightly so. I mean, if there were more, the game would literally be broken. But anyways, what am I talking about for those that are unaware? ATB Assist makes it so that if you do 2 ATB actions back to back, the other party members will build a chunk of ATB. Not all ATB actions work for this, or rather, you can't necessarily do them in any order. For example, if you do a magic cast into a weapon ability, it won't trigger. But if you do a weapon ability into a magic cast, it will trigger this. Some moves just don't cancel into other moves, and as such won't trigger the boost. This ability does not stack, also. If you do 3 ATB moves back to back, you don't get 2 different procs of the ATB assist for doing 2 different, like, ATB moves back to back. You see what I mean? You would have to do 4 in a row to get another proc of it. Skill Master gives you a chance to boost your own ATB when you do 3 different ATB moves in one fight. It doesn't matter when or how close they need to be to each other, but it doesn't stack continuously. Like, if you do 4 moves in a row, it only gives you the boost for the first 3 moves, and then it creates a new set of 3. So you are allowed to do, say, like, dive kick, regen, unbridled strength, dive kick, regen, in that order to get 2 procs of Skill Master. That would work. This mechanic suddenly gives you more direction. It gives you genuine strategy, a reason to weigh the pros and cons of something with an actual understanding of what those pros and cons are, and especially when they are combined. Because if you only had 1 ATB bar, but you know that your next action will trigger Skill Master and build you the next ATB bar, you can do a move that'll trigger Skill Master and then immediately cancel it into another ATB action to trigger the ATB assist, and then you can use that reasoning to think, can I do something that'll build ATB for me to get those moves back to back that will also be useful in the particular context that I am currently in? What moves have I already used for this set of 3 for Skill Master? I want to do a move here, but I can't pick either of those 2 moves that I've already done because that would be wasting my procs of Skill Master. So let me pick a different one. I normally do, say, Dive Kick here, but I've already used Dive Kick for this current set of 3 for Skill Master, so instead let me use, like, Overpower. Per se. You have to weigh the situational benefits of each move next to your Skill Master choices and how much ATB you will generate from doing them, such as with, like, Focus Strike or Disorder with Cloud, both of which are ATB moves, but they also build ATB back on hit, essentially rendering them as, like, costing half an ATB gauge rather than a full, and allowing you to get, ATB back to get 2 ATB moves in a row without necessarily having full ATB. This is a great mechanic. It's a good mechanic that gives you actual direction in a fight. It gives you strategy. The only problem with this particular case are, well, one, it's overpowered. You build so much ATB, it's insane. You basically can't run out of ATB once you get going, especially with Tifa once she's on Chi level 3. You'd only have a lull moment of, say, like, if you did Focus Strike, but the attack missed the opponent, so you didn't build back any ATB that you were expecting, and you have to build a little bit more. 2, this mechanic is way too proactive. Proactive mechanics aren't inherently bad, but when this mechanic is working, you basically don't even need to care what the enemies are or what they're doing. You just steamroll them with constant ATB moves. However, when you fight enemies that, say, move around so much that you can't reliably hit them with your ATB moves or that are constantly interrupting your actions, so that you're once again at the mercy of the game, it's, again, not fun to deal with because the enemy actions in this game are not fun to try to navigate around, per se. 3, this mechanic inherently makes it so that you mostly just play as one character the entire time, rather than switching it up for each situation. Only one character can have the ATB assist that fuels the other characters, so you pretty much only get massively rewarded by playing that one character almost the entire time. FF4. This isn't part of the core game design. This is just some weird additional materia thing that a lot of people don't experiment with or know about. But in any case, it is still a good example of a mechanic that gives you direction and adds strategic depth to your choices in combat. Like if you do X, then you are rewarded or punished with Y. The X has to be something that you need to go out of your way to do, such as use 2 ATB moves back to back, or constantly mix up which ATB moves you're doing rather than just use the same ones for every situation. Otherwise, it doesn't motivate you to change how you play in order to achieve some of the sort of value for doing so. Now, I'm not here to state exactly what this game needs. There are an infinite number of ways that they could handle this. But the game right now really lacks direction a lot of the time, and it needs more mechanics to give you a reason and add depth to your choices, reasons to choose what you end up choosing in the game. The stagger system is also very weird. It's kind of like the stagger system from FF13 that I remember being very odd and unintuitive, but the stagger gauge just kind of builds when you hit enemies in the game, so what makes that different from, like, the health bar, per se? You just keep hitting the enemies until they eventually stagger. It's very odd. In this game, it makes a little more sense than it did in FF13, as I recall, but it's still something that's hard to go out of your way to achieve. Different enemies have different stagger mechanics, so like if you're fighting a turret, for example, normally attacking it won't stagger it, but if Tifa leaves, like, say, a chi trap on it and does magic damage constantly to it, it'll stagger right away because magic triggers that stagger for that particular enemy type. That makes sense, and that's like attacking and staggering are two different things where you have to go out of your way for the stagger. However, for most enemies, and I know that pretty much everyone I watch played like this, they just kind of fight enemies just by generally attacking them, just doing whatever the fuck, and when they get into the pressured state from taking damage or whatever, then they use skills like focus thrust and all that shit to go for the stagger. But in those cases, you mostly get the same staggers all the time. Like, everyone I watched would stagger the same enemies in more or less the same places. So, like, within their health bar. So I don't even think of this as, like, a mechanic that you go out of your way to take advantage of. It just happens automatically while you're fighting enemies, basically. Sometimes they get pressured, and then you take the opportunity to build the stagger gauge. For a lot of enemies, that's all you can do for the stagger gauge. If I see fucking Joe Blow Soldier Man, I can't say, oh, I'm gonna go for the stagger on that enemy, because, I mean, he's gonna fucking die in like 4 hits before I can even try to build his stagger gauge. If I see a boss, I don't think, oh, I'll strategize around, like, going for the stagger for this boss, because it'll just happen. It'll just happen naturally. I don't change the way I play. I just fight the enemy, the boss takes damage, gets pressured, I'll do focus everything, and he'll be staggered. I don't do much different. Nothing changed. The path to most staggers is more or less just the path that you would take if stagger didn't exist as a mechanic at all. So there's no change in your gameplay decisions, hardly for most of the fight. I'm not sure how to feel about limit breaks in this game either. In this, they build from damage taken and from when you stagger enemies. And like I already said, you don't have that much influence on how many staggers you get in a fight most of the time, or if there's a way to stagger faster or before an enemy dies. It's by wasting MP on magic that we already established is not worth it. So most of the time, limit breaks come from how much damage you take, or like the 2 items that you can equip in this game that give you limit gauge from spending MP or ATB, both of which are extremely overpowered equips, by the way. But anyways, yeah, limit breaks are stupidly strong in this game. Eris's are, like, okay, not great. Planet's protection is decent. Both of them will save you if you're in trouble, which I guess makes them slightly different from the others, but the other characters' limit breaks just hit so insanely hard. It's a joke. Like, and refocus is insane, too. Absolutely broken for most encounters if you pair it with your battery character. It was while watching players who weren't, like, uptight perfectionist assholes like myself play this game that I finally understood what limit breaks are for in this game. So long as you more or less survive to near the end of a fight, you instantly win it. Players who were performing much worse than I was in all of these fights would just keep healing and reviving and healing, and eventually the limit break would be ready, and then they'd just clear the last huge chunk of a boss's health bar and win just like that. It makes players perform evenly between a player like myself who spends no MP and no items and never lets a single party member get KO'd at any point, and a player who is, spending so much MP they're literally running out of healing. The limit break comes and saves the day and makes it so both of those players basically perform around the same level, okay? Makes it so that you can't realistically perform any worse than that. Now, I don't mind this. Comeback mechanics like this are fine, but it really does make me think, like, even if I wanted to, I barely get to use limit breaks because I just don't fuck up as hard as other players do. I wish it were more integrated into the active strategy of the game so that I could use this tool in my game plan and make optimal use out of it rather than it almost exclusively being a tool for either the few fights in the game that are long enough that everyone will get their limit break by the time it's over, or because you get so many staggers on the enemy like certain bosses, or just when you're doing really poorly. Okay, so that's a wrap on game direction through mechanics, food for thought. Now I'm going to just mention a few other lingering combat critiques before moving on to another extremely important topic that not a lot of people talk about when discussing this game. Okay, so general shit. Flying enemies are the worst. Obviously, everyone knows this. Otherwise, limbs that regular special abilities won't reach, like the horns of certain bosses. Everyone hates the flying enemies, and they are right to do so. I'm not going to pelt it with magic and waste a shitload of MP that I don't need to, so I guess I just won't be attacking some of these body parts of enemies, or some of these, air combat is so insanely clunky. Your character jumps up in the air when you don't want them to because they accidentally soft lock aggroed onto a flying enemy that was happening to go by because, again, they're way too mobile. Your jump doesn't reach the flying enemy's movement, and your character's just punching air and nothing. It all feels awful and clunky as hell. It's insanely glitchy, too. You can get knocked out of the map very easily. Most of the weapon abilities in the game can't hit flying enemies, so it reduces the combat down to really just almost nothing. And even when they fall down near the ground, a lot of the flying enemies still hover way too high up in the air to be hit by a lot of moves reliably. Pretty stupid. Enemy auto-tracking is insane in this game. Some enemies can auto-track even during their linear actions. It makes me wonder why a dodge button exists at all in this game if, the auto-tracking is so insanely bad that, say someone charges at you and you dodge to the side and the auto-tracking makes it so that they just keep tracking you, or say someone's preparing a big laser and you can see that they're about to shoot a projectile at your direction and you dodge and it just keeps tracking you through the entire thing. What's even the point? You literally can't avoid those things. Or if it is technically possible, it's really inconsistent and does not work well at all and should be made less shitty and awful and clunky. If an attack was intended to reach that far to, say, the left or the right, it should have been animated as an attack that visually looks like it would hit to the left or right. If you just animate an attack however you feel like say if you animate a guy preparing for it and then going for a stab, and then you just rotate it through time and space to keep following the player even if it makes no visual sense to do so, that's just you being an incompetent game designer. A player has no way of knowing how far auto-tracking will chase them, if it even does eventually stop at some point or not. They just don't know until they painstakingly test anything and everything to see if there's a limit to the auto-tracking or the wild as fuck hitboxes that some of these moves have. Another thing, huge annoyance, massive, huge, obnoxious thing. Cutscenes during boss fights are the worst in this game. For the vast majority of the game, you aren't even allowed to use the game mechanics as they've been explained to you. So, say you're fighting a boss, you've almost got the stagger gauge maxed out, you trigger the pressured state. You plan ahead so that your party is already high on ATB when this happens. You know that the last big hit to push the boss over the edge and get the stagger, so what you do as the player, you know the best opportunity to deal the largest amount of damage possible based on the systems that have been explained to you. This is why you're going for the stagger in the first place. So you stagger the boss with focus thrust or something. You hit them with Tifa's Rise and Fall to increase the value. Maybe Eris does her big laser thing that also increases the multiplier. You've already inputted Infinity Edge for Cloud, so he's gearing up for that to dump some serious asshole. Oh wait, go fuck yourself, player. all of a sudden, a cutscene starts playing without any warning whatsoever. The boss moves on to the next phase, teleports to some other position in the stage, is no longer staggered, their stagger gauge has reset entirely, and your attacks didn't actually finish or connect, so they didn't deal any damage, or even if they did land, the health bar of the boss just grays out halfway through, indicating that you're not allowed to deal any more damage during this phase of the boss fight until the next cutscene plays. And the game doesn't even fucking give you back the ATB that you just spent, say, activating Infinity Edge, that the game just canceled with no warning. Fuck off. You have no way to plan around this because you don't know when these stupid-ass cutscenes are going to trigger and halt everything and stop you from utilizing the mechanics of the game and cashing in on the stagger system that is... Why does the stagger system exist if they just fuck you over and say, no, you're not actually allowed to deal that much damage. No, just stop. The health bar's grayed out. You can't hit the boss anymore now. All they need to fix this is just segment the health bar. Make it so the player can visually see when they're approaching the range of the health that once you pass over it at a specific point, it'll trigger the next cutscene or next phase. That's all you need. Just let the player see when the next phase will trigger on the health bar in advance so that you aren't fucking the player over for doing what should have been intelligent strategic choices that they did. Next. I think Eris needs a little bit of a rework to her toolkit, even outside of everything I've already explained for the characters to be reworked and what I'll talk about later on, but Eris is the character I probably played the least of on my second and third playthroughs. Eris is the character with the least ability to deal with enemies that are aggroed to her. She doesn't move fast, she's not tanky, she doesn't have counterattack moves like Cloud. Her only move that can't be interrupted is her Magic Storm thing, unlike, say, Tifa, who does Star Shower and has a few moves that are invincible, or at least armored. Nor does it ensure that Eris won't just get hit in the recovery of Magic Storm or whatever it's called, and each individual action that she takes has so much recovery. If you shoot with Barret, you can stop at any time to block. Tifa has really fast punches that recover really quickly, and you can cancel them instead of dodging or invincible ATV moves too, like your Focus Strike, which is an invincible dodge that you can cancel the dodge portion of into a manual dodge, so that you don't have to commit to the follow-up attack and use it as an evasive thing. Cloud, so long as he's an operator, can cancel any of his swings into Punisher stance for the counterattack blocking, and him and Barret both have way more health than the other characters. Eris's regular attacks shoot like these insanely drawn-out single magic blasts, the very last one of which in the regular combo has so much recovery, it's impossible to see something and switch to defense in time. So yeah, the game either needs to have mechanics to pull aggro away from characters like Eris, who can't fucking deal with enemies constantly attacking and aggroing on her. Like, say, give Eris a move where she turns invisible for a little bit, and enemies stop aggroing her for a bit, and she can use this to reposition herself, but she won't be able to attack during this or build ATB while in this state, for example. Like, yes, the game has Provoke materia, which sucks, because it's an auto-cast move that only triggers when someone else in the party is about to die, so it's not something the player can use strategically as part of their intelligent game plan. It's just some bullshit that, like, if the player's fucking up, and it doesn't even work on strong enemies and bosses, so, like, yeah, who cares? The more I played the game, the less I played with Eris actively, because it's just more annoying to use her, which makes it more likely that enemies will aggro her. So, those are the general concepts of what is consistently wrong in this game from the combat side of things. But let's talk about the rest of the gameplay. What rest of the gameplay, you ask? Why, all of it, of course. Walking around town, running through a level, pulling a lever, pushing a button on a wall, climbing a ladder, sauntering over a high beam, just moving through the world. That gameplay, and it's no secret that this fucking sucks. This game is such a pain in the ass all the fucking time. It is so obnoxious, so infuriating. Like, holy shit, just get from point A to point B. Nothing is happening. If I'm replaying a section on hard for a second time through the game or something, I'm blazing through the actual combat, then I run dead into more time-wasting bullshit, conversations that you can't skip through like a full-on cutscene would, long-ass animations of just moving through the world, really frustrating parts of the game will dynamically change your controls on the fly, to the point that you end up vomiting because it's so insanely uncomfortable. Remember all the shit that I was talking about, like feedback and communication? How the satisfaction of game feel comes from feedback for performing correct actions, and how weird and off-putting it would be for a game to not deliver accurate feedback for your actions. When you're in a semi-cutscene, but you are still being made to walk somewhere, there are times when your controls frequently just change without warning, on the fly. I distinctly remember some of them because of how insanely uncomfortable they were to experience. When you're following Jessie to her house in the Plateside suburbs, for example, if you're caught up with her pace, the controls suddenly tank and your movement speed is forced to a crawl, a slow, lumbering animation, slow walk. But if you turn around and move in the opposite direction, you're allowed to walk at a normal pace, but you're still not allowed to sprint. Even if you hit the button suddenly just does nothing. And if you're a ways behind her in the cutscene, your sprint actually is allowed to do something. And your character, while switching between these different distances during the cutscene, will constantly be switching your movement controls on you. How your character responds to your direct inputs on your controller changes constantly. It's the grossest shit you get experience in the game. Like, imagine if you were playing an action game, but 20% of the time, when you hit the attack button, literally nothing happened. It's like you never even hit a button. Imagine how gross that would feel on your hands, in your gut, to watch the screen not produce any of the feedback that was supposed to be produced based on what you inputted on your controller. The action didn't happen, the feedback didn't happen. Do not do this in your games. I know a lot of modern games do awful shit like this, but that's no excuse. Stop fucking doing this. Stop forcing players to slowly walk through cutscenes they'd rather skip. Stop making half cutscenes where you're still not allowed to control like you normally control. What is even the point of this? Forcing your character to move at frustratingly slow speeds? Please don't tell me the logic is supposed to be that it makes more realistic in a baffling attempt to try to stop the player from doing whatever they'd be able to do normally that would break the immersion of the scene, quote unquote. Hey, guess what, dumbasses? That's never going to happen. There is no way in fuck that you can give a player control over a character, but somehow stop them from doing something weird that doesn't fit the tone of a scene. If a player wants to rub their chin against another's or sniff up someone's asshole, they'll fucking do it. You can't stop them from doing what they want. You can't force them to behave realistically in a scene. But you know what you can do? You can stop making these obnoxious sequences for players who've already seen these segments, for players who don't care about these segments in the first place, for players who just don't want their controls to get fucked with on a whim because of how gross it feels in their hands. Forcing a player to slow down through dialogue or semi-cutscenes or just basic movement through an area is nothing more than an annoying waste of time if the player wants to get through that crap faster. You know why I don't have the Platinum Trophy right now? Because to get the other dresses and any other shit that I would need, I'd need to go through this obnoxious, shitty side quests and cutscenes and garbage where 90% of my time is going to be spent mashing through dialogue, trying to get through scenes, watching my character slowly move through the world towards the goal, and only the remaining 10% of my time will actually be spent fighting something, aka doing anything that requires any fucking thought whatsoever or warrants me being a living creature. Then I'd have to get through the annoying tunnel sequences of the slow-moving robot hand puzzles and, like, I know we're not out that part of the video where I talk about the minigames, but, like, it's still a needless time sink that just doesn't need to be there and only hurts the experience. This is by far the actual biggest problem in the game because of all the time-wasting shit of not being able to beeline for the actual gameplay and progression if you want to is the number one reason why it sucks to replay this or do the post-game content or let alone get through the game in the first time. Like, even on your first playthrough, when you're watching a really long, drawn-out animation of Cloud slowly walking over a beam to get to another platform, that sucks. Fucking garbage. Personally, I don't think the combat gameplay in this game is that boring, even if I have played it for quite some time, which is a nice strength that the game has going for it, in my opinion. But you know what was boring? everything I just described, painfully doing fuck all nothing but sliding a finger in and out of my asshole as I patiently waited for Cloud to walk over a beam just to get across a gap that, based on what I've already seen in the game, he probably could have just fucking jumped over and saved us all some goddamn time. If you're a modern game dev who puts this kind of shit in your games, I don't like you as a human being. A good rule of thumb is to look back over every section of your gameplay and think, would a speedrunner be yawning during this? If you're ever forcing the player to wait, forcing them to only progress at a certain pace, even if the player has the skills and knowledge to progress at whatever pace he or she pleases, that's garbage. Okay, so now we can talk about the slow-ass robot puzzles, minigames in general, puzzles in general. Yeah, they all suck some soggy scrotum. This is once again a nice example of the concept of, that basic shit anyone making any entertainment or artistic piece of media should keep in the back of their minds. Play to your strengths. Hey, out of all of you who beat this game, you know that part in the sewers where Cloud waits at the button and Tifa and Eris go and operate a pump, and there's a minigame where you mash a button to increase the window you have to work with, and then you just hit the button at the right time to land in the red zone, and you have to do that 3 times over, and each time you miss, it takes an obnoxiously long amount of time for the characters to get back in the position to do it again, instead of just letting you blaze through and try again right away. You remember that section? Yeah. So, if you recall that sequence, at the time, tell me, what was going through your mind? Something like, oh my god, this gameplay is so much fun, this has such deep systems, I can't wait to keep doing this. In fact, I wish I could do this even longer. This is an absolute joy to experience. Fuck playing more of the actual combat. This is the shit right here. This is exactly how I want to be spending my time. Or maybe you're actually a sane human being who did not think anything of the sort. Some of these minigames, I get that they're just trying to shove in minigames from the original for the sake of fan service, regardless of whether they're actually entertaining to do. Especially how they drag out every minigame that used to be in the original long past what would actually be amusing to participate in based on the relative complexity of said minigame. But, this pump one in the sewer, why? Why does it exist? It's not fun. There's nothing satisfying about playing this. It's just a waste of time, and that time would have been better spent engaging in the much more developed actual gameplay of the game. Hence, play to your strengths. Why would you waste a player's time with an experience of some subsystem that is way less fun and engaging than the actual core system that you could have just let them keep going on? It's not like this gives them some appeal that the main game wouldn't, like having alternate different styles of gameplay. And, the robot arms and the collapsed highway are another great example of, slow-ass animations, needlessly padding shit out for the sake of pure time sink. Think of it like this. The puzzles in this game are such baby shitcakes, nothingburg, easy shit-stain nothings, that it takes longer to actually input the shit into the game to execute the solution to the puzzle than it takes to mentally solve the puzzle. You play the arms section where there's a warding materia or whatever it was that you can get, and it takes maybe 2 seconds of looking at the puzzle to figure out what you're supposed to do, and then it takes well over 2 minutes to actually move the arms and the boxes and get Eris over there, and then get her back and move on with the story. I'm sure some of you might be asking, well, if you think underdeveloped minigames that aren't fun on their own are a waste of time, how do you defend the minigames from the original that some of these minigames are copying? Good question, guy who doesn't exist, because most of the people who would like this game are not the type to ask good questions or make good arguments. But, for starters, let's hold our horses there, okay? I never said I liked the minigames from the original either. The biggest problem with a remake is that people hyper-specifically compare it to the original and completely lose sight of the bigger picture. Bad game design is bad game design, guys. Now, other than that, the minigames in the original were much less time-consuming in basically every facet. They were shorter. The actual dialogue and animations for each action taken in the minigames were much more brief. They weren't really developed enough to be fun on their own, like something you'd want to do for a long period of time, but they were also so short that they just exist as, I guess, perceivable, charming breaks from the normal gameplay that take maybe a few seconds to complete. Do I think they added a lot to the original? Not particularly. Or at least not most of them, but yeah. This is another great example of how more is rarely ever better. You can't take something that's appeal is that it's not a big deal and then your brilliant fucking idea is, why don't we make it bigger? And yeah, there aren't a lot of minigames in this, and I think, like, the darts minigame is more or less fine, but it's also just like every other fucking, darts minigame in every other video game. But, yeah. Now, that's with the exception of the bike minigame at the end of the Midgar section in the original that has a very distinct appeal. That minigame is actually fun. It's fun enough that I, even the god savior of getting bored of shit quickly, went to the place later in the game where you can do the arcade thing and you can play that minigame again, and I did it for like 1 or 2 more times and then stopped. But the point is, I actually wanted to do it again because it was amusing for a bit. No one would do that for this bike minigame in this game. This game is not fun. This minigame. People would not relish the opportunity to play this bike section again. Why is this? Well, in the original game, the bike section is very simple. It was also very, more visually appealing relative to the rest of the game because it's all rendered in 3D rather than the usual 3D on top of JPEGs and shit, and the consistency of the art style makes it more appealing to look at. And yes, ageists that think that pixel counts are the deciding factor in art design quality, it does look visually good because it's consistent. But for pure gameplay, it's different from the rest of the more stiff map movements or semi-turn-based, kinda turn-based, real-time, whatever main combat system the original game had. The bike minigame was a simple and highly responsive little game where you move around and hit enemies to the left or right of you. The most important factor, it felt good to play. This once again ties back to game feedback, communication, responsiveness of controls. In the original game, when you hit left on the D-pad, you know what happened? Cloud actually fucking moves to the left. When you hit right, he moves to the right. The game actually responds to what you input quickly and precisely. I mean, it's fucking shocking. This is next level. No, it's not. Jesus Christ. Can't have that in modern games, though. It's all about making the controls worse arbitrarily so that they can facilitate longer and more obnoxious animations.
As I said, there has absolutely been a trade-off of responsiveness, video gaminess of controls for my hated realism. When Sora is turning around, he does a full, step, 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 step motion. It's obnoxious, and it happens every time. It's very much like it felt in Final Fantasy 15 with Noctis, fucking tripping all over his legs and shit. Oh, I gotta turn around. I gotta maneuver myself over this rough terrain. Yeah, very impressive technically. I don't give a shit. I'm trying to fight that fucking Heartless. I need precision in my controls. There was a moment when I was trying to get a lucky emblem and I was trying to position Sora so I could get a good selfie with the thing, and as I tried to turn around on this small ledge, I just kept walking off of it because Sora can't turn on a dime anymore to save his fucking life. Moments like that actually made my game playing experience significantly worse because of this type of control scheme. Yes, it's fair to point out that games as a whole are doing this, but I'm gonna fucking fight the practice every step of the way. At least for this type of game.
When you don't see an immediate feedback when you input something, that dampens the satisfaction of that input. It's just inherently worse for people who actually take gameplay seriously and try to play well. People who actually want to play real gameplay will always prefer precision and responsiveness in controls to, the fucking quote-unquote smoothness of the animation or all this other dumb shit. In FF7R, the bike does not respond to your inputs. The controls are clunky. You'll want to move forwards because an enemy is in front of you, so you hit the gas for a good 2, 3, 4, 5 seconds, not maybe 5 seconds, but nothing will happen and you won't move and you won't be getting any closer to the enemy. And then all of a sudden, you'll be moving so far quickly, and then you'll want to stop where you'll be lined up with the enemy, and then you hit the brakes, and then again nothing happens, and your character just shoots past the enemy, or otherwise they brake and go past you. You cannot control your spacing very well. It's so obnoxiously bad. Then, when all the enemies are behind you or directly to the left or right of you and they're off camera and you can't see them or tell where they are or what they're doing or what's happening, you basically receive no real clean-cut feedback for anything you do on the bike. The camera's shit, the movement doesn't ever feel like it's listening to your inputs, the whole sequence is easy, so who cares, but you clunkily just bumble your way to the enemies and clunkily hit them a few times. Maybe you input your spinning slash and suddenly your bike just starts drifting a million miles away from the enemy that you are targeting for no real reason. Just the entire controls are shit. they're just shit. It doesn't feel good, like in a game where you would actually have precision in your inputs. Am I saying don't have minigames at all? Well, you don't have to, obviously, but that's the choice of the creator for what appeals they want to have in the game. The point is, if you're going to add content, if you're going to add an appeal to the gameplay, actually put some thought into it to make it something the player would want to do, and not just inherently less enjoyable than everything else in the game, like the core combat. Oh yeah, and the exploration sucks in this game. It's almost never rewarding or interesting. Moving around this game is a pain in and of itself because all the movement animations and lever pulling and all that shit is so obtuse and needlessly long-winded. There are no compelling puzzles. The side quests are mostly god-awful in terms of gameplay content if they involve anything other than fighting. The game is so limiting in what you can even acquire, and as such, you'll open some, like, secret path in a late game area, and you'll be rewarded with, like, a fucking ice materia. For some reason, a level 1, no AP, fucking ice materia. Thanks. And even when it's rewarding, like, you know, with the limited weapons in the game, it's just so brain dead and unengaging. Like, they're just given to you outright, or go down this obvious side path with no roadblocks or puzzles or anything. Here's a reward. The game just doesn't have the means of giving you more satisfying rewards for more nuanced exploration or hidden paths or puzzles the way it's currently designed. All of the potentially interesting rewards for exploration are just given to you by Chadley. Since your abilities are tied to the weapons that you collect, they're much more of a, you need to get this, you should definitely get this thing instead of an optional thing, so they feel that they have to put it very obviously in the main path. Now, like I said, not all games have the same appeals, obviously. You know, this game is wildly different from the original FF7, has completely different appeals in every sense. So this game doesn't need to have some rewarding exploration or puzzles or fun minigames or anything like that, but since they put some shitty minigames, some shitty puzzles, some shitty exploration, and, you know, I of course need to point them out, because they're just wasting time that could have been better content. It's up to them whether they want to try to make these better or abandon them entirely. A game, like any media, should stick to its strengths. If a game has, say, fun combat but shitty, boring, I don't know what, platforming or something, the game switches between, say, an hour of fun combat and an hour of shitty platforming, well, then they should just fucking cut the platforming sections altogether. That's the number one thing people who love remakes don't understand. More isn't always better. In fact, it rarely improves something. To give you a quick example, the sort of mental gymnastics people have to go through to defend something they fanboy out over, listen to this shit right here.
Also saw somebody else mention that they actually thought that having the rats everywhere was actually not necessarily a bad thing. It made the world feel more lived in. I suppose that's one way to look at it. Yeah, I mean, it can feel a little artificial, and if all the enemies are just like, hey, this next area I went to has enemies just the level I need them to be, instead of just having these kind of scrub enemies, which I suppose that makes sense. I mean, I guess maybe I'm thinking about it too much from a gamey point of view. I just thought the rats would have been a little stronger. Is that helicopter coming this way?
So this, fair gentleman, is positing that the boring, time-wasting fights against monsters that are not even close to your level and you clear out in a matter of seconds are good because they are more realistic, quote-unquote. You know what else would be realistic? Watching Cloud for an hour or so struggle to go to sleep at night. Watching a character for 20 uninterrupted minutes as they read a fucking book to get some information. You know what? Why time cuts exist in media? Because some shit is just fucking boring and doesn't benefit the media in any meaningful way and actively makes the experience of consuming it negative or at least uninteresting. If they added a 2-hour sequence that was just like boring as fuck, let's say like you had to actually pick flowers from Eris's garden for like maybe an hour or so to take it to the orphanage or whatever, and you were just watching Cloud do the same exact animation, the same exact flower picking the entire time, would you defend that because it's more realistic? That's a terrible goddamn argument. It's always been a terrible argument, and the same is true for these bad elements of the gameplay. Bad exploration is bad exploration. It would be better if it didn't exist at all, and thus didn't waste your time with content that wasn't up to par with the rest of the game, assuming the rest is, of course, even better in the first place. Who was sitting there doing that pump minigame at the end of the sewer section and thought to themselves, I sure like that I'm doing this right now. I would love to spend more of my time doing this. This is a valuable use of my time and my attention span. There's no sense in forcing the player to consume shitty, uninteresting, and underdeveloped content when they could be consuming engaging content instead. Stick to your strengths. Now, in this particular case, it's up to them if they want to cut their weak elements, like I said. If I'd had to wager a guess, I'd say they probably want to keep it in there because it seems like they want to make an RPG, even if they don't know how. With exploration and puzzle elements and all the shit they're trying to do, they should just, do a better job, which isn't hard. Plenty of other games come out every month with better puzzles, better exploration. You're making a remake already. You clearly don't mind copy and pasting existing finished work. Just fucking copy, like, Hollow Knight's exploration puzzle design or something. It doesn't matter. Alrighty, we're coming near the end of the general criticisms, just one major hurdle left, and then we'll talk about some arbitrary potential improvements. See, since this is supposed to be about how to improve the gameplay, a lot of that will come from just fixing these problems, but improving gameplay can also come from just making completely new good ideas, adding strengths rather than only focusing on shoring up weaknesses. But for the final major weakness, the overall content in this game feels lacking. Now, I'm sure some of you are probably baffled by that statement. This is a 40-hour game, give and take, taken from a 4-hour section of the original FF7. How could it not have enough content? Well, first, we have to remember that everything is relative, and this kind of ties back to the linearity problem and the genre problem of not having any real potential challenge to clash against with our mastery over the gameplay as players. If you stop to think about it, the vast majority of the time you spend in this game is not spent in content, gameplay content. If you really examine the minute-to-minute breakdown, most of the time is spent just moving through the world, talking, cutscenes, or anything that just wastes time. Even from the fights, a huge number of them are barely even worth remembering, because they just pitch you against enemies that don't really stand a chance and don't challenge you, and of course, it's not like a weak fight against weak enemies could matter in terms of training your resources, like in a better resource management game, as we already established, so they just might as well not be there. After that, you beat the game, you quickly hit the level cap after that, you beat the post-game content, which is not very much, and when I got to that point, the only thing I was thinking was, really? Like, there really isn't any more content for me to do, at all. Hard mode has a few extremely minor modifications to some of the boss fights, but that's about it. There's just like fuck, man, like, what else do I do? There's so much stuff I never used, so many things I never tried, so many situations I was never put in. So I was never encouraged in any way to make use of some potential strategic tool in the gameplay. Like, I could wear an item that makes me resist, say, frenzy. When the fuck am I going to wear that? When is that even in the game, that I might want to wear a ring that resists frenzy? I don't usually finish a lot of JRPGs having completed 100% of the gameplay content, and even when I have, there could be a new way of approaching it. Like, say, again, if I played a Persona game, I could do wildly different builds with some characters or with the protagonist. I could approach the unique dungeons with their unique encounters differently. There's normal mode, there's hard mode. In P5, there's a merciless mode, which actually changes the core mechanics of the game in such a way that it's basically a brand new experience. And all this slapped on top with all the optional content it already has is a massive JRPG with side content, side dungeons, where different random encounters might occur long-term, for which you can bring in different combinations of party members to make it a unique experience. In FF7R, I have nothing left that I feel any desires to do. The only thing really left for me would be to figure out and practice high DPS magic quick kills for various encounters and boss fights, just for the fun of it. Even if I redo the content that already exists, 1, it's going to be obnoxious because all the cutscenes are slow as shit and I have to get through all that crap to get to the action, and 2, because of the vagueness and the proactivity of the gameplay. Now, allow me to explain the difference between proactive and reactive gameplay. Reactive gameplay is when you must adjust your actions around the current situation. Each level is unique, and as such you must approach each level differently. Each level can be extremely simple to the point of only having one real solution, without the potential nuances of having different dynamic solutions or multiple potential routes. Proactive gameplay is what it sounds like. You make choices proactively, you can approach most of the game pretty much the same way, you pay less attention to the specifics of whatever situation you're in, and more attention to refining the nuances of what you're doing. Proactive gameplay can be strong because it doesn't rely on good level design. If you have a strong foundation to your gameplay, you can just take that very complex, very nuanced toolkit of gameplay and just mash it against anything. The player will have fun. Reactive gameplay requires constantly innovating with your level design to make new things for the player to get invested and intrigued by. Now here's the sticking point. Proactive gameplay will eventually get boring as fuck once you do it for long enough, while reactive gameplay, so long as the same quality is kept up with new content, will continue to feel fresh and exciting over time. Take the Soulsborne games. There really isn't a ton that changes regarding the game system, strictly speaking, between each game. You basically play the exact same in every Soulsborne game. The quality and excitement comes from the unique levels, enemies, situations, bosses, everything you come into contact with that forces you to react to them. They could keep making games probably forever without them getting boring, just by copy and pasting the same core gameplay, because what matters is the levels and situations, not the core mechanics. The perfect breakdown of proactive to reactive gameplay, I think, is found, let's look at, say, chess and Portal 2. Maybe not, whatever, we'll see. Okay, you can't get a more reactive game than Portal 2. Each level is a puzzle. You cannot tackle every level the same way every time. You have to pay attention to the unique elements of each level and play around them, because most puzzles are only going to have one solution to figure out. Portal 2, if it kept up its level of quality with having new levels and new puzzles and unique gimmicks and shit, Portal 2 could have been 200 hours long, and it would never have gotten boring, unless they just ran out of ideas for new puzzles. It's like a crossword book. If you're solving a puzzle you haven't solved before, it's still exciting and a new and engaging experience, even hundreds of hours into the exact same mechanics. Maybe chess is not the best example of proactive gameplay. I mean, I was going to use MGS5 as an example, but I figured, one hot take is enough for one day. But anyways, I guess I'll explain that one. Where the missions are more or less the same, and you just have a really complex and nuanced toolkit to work with, but eventually you'll realize that you can basically beat almost every mission doing pretty much the same shit. Just identify the guard positions, crawl in, tranquilize every guard you see, get what you need, and then get out. Once there's a lot of nuance and things that can happen during that, but once you master those core mechanics, it doesn't matter if you do an old mission or a new mission. Eventually they'll all feel exactly the same, because they don't force you to reconsider a fundamental approach or do anything different most of the time. If you were to play the exact same level in Portal 2 over and over, you would get bored of it very quickly, because one level doesn't have a lot of nuance to it when it has only one solution, and the mechanics aren't nuanced enough to change that solution really at all. If you were to play the same level in MGS5, it would take you a lot longer to get bored of it, because the nuance and intrigue comes from your toolkit as the player, not the specifics of the level. However, long-term, really long-term, playing more missions in MGS5 will eventually start to get boring once you finally start getting tired of the toolkit you have, while in Portal 2, playing new levels you haven't done before will never be boring. That is the most basic explanation of proactive and reactive gameplay I can give. Basically, games should probably strive to have both. Take something like Bloodborne, for example. A lot of people, myself included, have replayed that game more times than probably any other game we've ever owned, because the content is so resistant to becoming tiresome. It has both proactive and reactive appeals. Each level is unique and forces you to play around its design and its gimmicks and its shit. Each boss forces you to adjust how it works, or else you die. But the game also has so much nuance to how you can approach the game and have different builds and playstyles that are all fun, unlike, say, in classic Dark Souls, where I personally could never get into playing as a caster of any kind. In proactive games, the interest comes from giving the player new tools to incorporate into their proactive choices and personal stylistic decisions regarding their own build and approach. In reactive games, obviously it's 100% on the level design, new enemies, new bosses as the game continues, that sort of thing. Bringing this back to FF7R, I worry for the future of this gameplay system because it doesn't look great under these lenses. I'm not currently bored of it per se, but I am bored of playing this game, FF7R. Like I said, there is not enough content. If I were to replay the game again, I wouldn't approach any of those same combat encounters fundamentally differently. I'm not a moron, so I wouldn't just start throwing around magic and wasting MP. I don't really have like a build or a playstyle that I could use to tackle any part of the game particularly differently. Hell, you can't even choose your own party members for 99.9% of this game. The game is very proactive, and the core gameplay is very nuanced and pretty fun, so it hasn't gotten boring yet, but it will. It will. If MGS5 taught me anything, it's that shit that is too proactive will eventually get boring no matter what new content you end up adding. It's not like Bloodborne, where going for different builds or using a specific weapon I haven't used before and maybe tackling the areas in a different order or at a different pace will be like beelining straight for the boss rooms on one playthrough, for example, will make the experience any different. In FF7R, you have to do mostly the same shit, and you're really not going to do it that much differently than you did it before. Any situation that unfolds is going to be more or less just like a dozen of other situations you've already been in other fights in the game. Especially literally. I mean, like, fuck, there's so many repeated enemy types in this 40-hour game. Like, oh, great, another elite shock trooper. I wonder if I'm going to switch to Cloud and use his counter attack to knock him off balance and kill him quickly. How you fight enemies is so proactive in this game, you could pretty much use the same decisions and strategies in the majority of all situations that you encounter in the game. If the game doesn't become more reactive, as in more dependence on the unique factors of new levels, new combat encounters, new enemy types, like making it a bigger deal that you dodge enemy attacks after figuring out how they work, or how to position yourself, or dealing with weird gimmicks like hiding behind a big box to avoid the scorpion laser in that boss fight, for example. And that's a simplistic one, but that is a case where you actually make your decision of what to do based around the unique properties of this current fight, rather than the general game systems you usually operate under. Yeah, if it doesn't get more reactive, eventually people will get tired of this gameplay. Some people will just get tired of it faster than others. Now, like I said earlier, you can keep a proactive game interesting by adding new tools to the player's kit, but here's the thing. Think about the end of this game. When you got to the last few weapon abilities in FF7R, by that point, did you really use them in such a way that it changed how you approached the combat? Did you use Eris's ATB ward a lot and redesign your strategies of what to do around that tool? Did you use her lustrous shield a lot? Did you use a ton of Cloud's like counter stance ability from Twin Stinger? Did you really design your gameplay decisions around Barrett's point-blank move? Or really any of Barrett's last 3 moves in the game? I'll bet that the only ability, the 6th ability that you guys really used a lot into your core strategy was Tifa's True Strike attack. Now yes, this part of the game is just game balance, as far as I can tell also. Like, Eris's ATB ward is just a pile of dog shit, so why would I use it? All it does is waste ATB and allow other characters to take ATB from Eris, but only if she has some available for them to steal, and Eris isn't a very good battery character for generating ATB in the first place, so what's even the point? There is a minor benefit in certain circumstances, but they're hard to come by. And I already talked about the game direction problem with Barrett's late-game weapon abilities. All of this goes to show, in the next game, what are they really going to do with this? They probably have to add new core mechanics to add to the game to add depth and complexity to it, and new progression systems with new tools. Otherwise, I don't see this working long-term. For example, let's say FF7R Part 2 came out and had the same moves and shit, but like maybe a new set of 5 or 6 weapons with new weapon abilities to learn across the game and nothing else. I don't see this keeping people compelled in the proactivity of the gameplay. See, a lot of the abilities you get in this game just fill out your toolkit. Like, before Cloud got triple slash, he didn't have a way to chase enemies with a special attack or hit a large group very effectively, or anything that hits quickly at all with a decent amount of damage. Now that Cloud has triple slash, that need has essentially been met. There aren't a whole lot of other needs in the game that weren't already met by the end of this game. Like, the real reason that you didn't use a lot of those final abilities, even some of the ones that are insanely overpowered and useful, like Eris's Lustrous Shield, which is borderline broken in some situations, the real reason you don't tend to use them is because you've already built up a general strategy with your current toolkit. You can approach the game in any situation and win
already. You know what you need to do. You know, like, you make Barret the tank, lifesaver on, maybe steel skin. You start generating ATB with the others for safety. Then you run your DPS. You already have a solid game plan. Lustrous Shield is cool and all, but, like, you're fine. You have a fully fleshed out way of doing things that already works. There's no situation that you already aren't prepared for that will happen in this game. So for you to start incorporating this other thing, you would have to fundamentally brick the game plan you've already developed and start making something new. You have no reason to do that. If they gave you even more moves in the next game, I don't think you'd need them. Unless they're just flat out better than your current options and replace them entirely. Like, let's say Cloud gets a move like Tifa's True Strike. Well, I mean, fine, but you'll still play the same. You'll use that move to increase the multiplier. Your game plan, how you approach combat, doesn't really change, and therefore the proactivity stays the same, and the game will get stale after a while. This goes to show that they can't just keep mindlessly throwing more tools at you and expect to keep things interesting. The gameplay needs to be adjusted so that there are more complexities to it, that new tools and ways of doing things would actually be something that you'd want or need. The gameplay needs to be more reactive. If you just keep fighting more of the same shit, more of the same enemy types, or you just do the same plan forever, just follow my outline and win everything without thinking about anything, it's going to get boring eventually. This is why I have an issue with the content in this game. Most of the content I could replay feels too samey now that I've already refined my game plan and how to utterly blow the fuck out of any enemy using the exact same strategy. I feel unsatisfied with the content in this game because I want a breadth of situations to match the breadth of the core mechanics, but it doesn't. It falls way too short. I want to be put in more unique situations with these mechanics so that I can explore them to a more satisfying degree. So yes, this game does not have enough content. Gameplay, combat, content. Alrighty, enough with the criticism. Now, just for fun shit. Baseless, random, arbitrary bullshit suggestions for the fun of it. Random ideas that I feel could be implemented to make the game more fun. And the first thing that is in my brain, thinking about how little incentive you have to play as different party members. I mentioned in a previous video segment that while I like the ATB Assist and Skill Master and what they do for the strategic complexity of decision-making in combat, the problem is that it creates situations where you more or less just want to spend all your time playing as the more valuable character who gets more out of ATB than the other characters, the battery characters I've been referring to it. For me, I think the most logical battery character is Tifa, and in the last 15 hours of playing the game, I can't remember using Cloud at any point for more than a few seconds at a time, except in the moments where you must play as only him. Doing all the side quests and all that extra shit, I almost never saw Cloud's moveset, Aeris's either. It was all Tifa and sometimes Barret, because that was obviously what the smartest choice was based on my build, which I believe to be the most optimal. The thing is, you don't really have a huge reason to play as any particular character in this game. I mean, most of a character's values comes from their weapon abilities, which you don't need to take manual control of them in order to perform. All ATB actions can be done through the battle menu. Realistically, these are the reasons why you would manually play a character. To use Barret's Overcharge, to use Tifa's Chi thing before it runs out, like Rise and Fall or Omni Strike, to use Barret or Aeris to shoot a distant enemy, like a flying enemy, to babysit a character to make them avoid something that they're too stupid to avoid on their own. Because you can't use the character you'd rather be using right now, like in fights where the boss aggroes the player character and you sort of constantly just have to switch characters to be able to do anything, like against Sephiroth or Bahamut. To use Cloud's counterattack because you've built a character to be a battery, or because you want that character to build a little more ATB over the next few seconds to have it available for something, like perhaps if they have a particular move on them you want them to be able to have access to, or just anything. That's it. I mean, the main reason you play as any particular character is because you want to build ATB with that character. And I guess if you know an enemy will be stationary for a bit for any reason, you can switch to Aeris so that she can set up a full charge Tempest on them ahead of time. Those are all the reasons why you would realistically want to play as a particular character other than just for the fuck of it.
the main reason you play with a particular character is to build ATB. You usually don't care that much about the character's built-in moveset. So what is my proposal? Well, I think it'd be a smarter choice for characters to have more distinct roles. Like, shit, man, like put more of a character into the real-time actions you take with the character. Don't just put every single thing that they can do into the ATB moves that you can trigger no matter who you're playing as. Like, think about it. What if you're playing with Eris, and there was a reason to play as Eris in that moment? Getting back to game direction. What if Eris, in addition to her current moves with basic projectiles and her Tempest, what if she could also shoot little projectiles at allies that would give them little bits of healing, like playing as Mercy in Overwatch or something? Or if she had regular moves, not ATB moves, that could apply some sort of buff to party members or pacify an enemy in some way? What if you had a reason to switch with Eris when the fight shifted in some way that you needed that kind of support, and therefore you would partially inform who you take manual control of based on what judgment call you make about the tide of battle and what you need right now? What if Barrett had, like, taunts or special properties on his attacks that had a uniquely high degree of aggro pulling, along with obviously a system where all attacks have a certain amount of aggro that are placed on enemies that might be influenced by who they're being hit by? And if Barrett was especially good at pulling aggro of enemies while you are manually controlling him? What if these characters had more things that you could only do while controlling them directly, and thus would give you an actual fucking reason to control them directly? What about that? And beyond that, this game is really light on a huge appeal of proactive games as well as RPGs in general, builds and customization. The only long-term customization you can really do in this game is with your weapon upgrades. Short-term customization that you can constantly shift with your materia slots are not the same thing as necessarily a build, per se. Compare this to another blend of action and RPG progression systems like the Yakuza games, earlier Yakuza games, not the new one that is just more or less a turn-based RPG. But, like, you choose what to purchase with your level-up orbs and shit in, say, like Yakuza 4. And this allows you to pick exactly what unique abilities to get for that character. Like, do you want Akiyama to get his extra heavy kick attack follow-ups for the end of his light combos? You can specifically funnel your levels into those skills as really quickly. You can have a sense of customization over which moves you get, and they make a difference, and you feel that they make a difference because they're unique, because they're offering legit new moves that you can do in real time. In FF7R, there's nothing that you can actually get with weapon upgrades or straight-up levels that will actually give you new tools to fiddle with in gameplay. The only new tools you get are from materia, which is shared between the cast, and from new weapons, which just gives you one new ability. And it's not like you had a choice, you know, like you didn't choose to pick this ability over a different ability. Like, come on, is this not a no-brainer? People like when they get to have progression systems that reward them with the custom choice of tangible new gameplay additions, especially ones that are unique to each character. Sekiro does this, Persona does this, where you choose which 4 moves to keep with your party members, and you can customize them in that way. This makes the content more repeatable because it creates new situations, and it's just a cool thing that people like in games when they can build their own toolkits for each party member. If you couldn't tell, I'm obviously advocating for a much more expansive toolkit that each character can have in real time. Right now, say I'm playing as Eris, all I can do is just shoot her one projectile, or charge up her slower projectile that really only has value in very specific situations where enemies are staying still long enough for it to detonate on them and still hit them. That's her entire toolkit. She has the one regular attack, basically to use in real time. That's it. What if her kit was more expansive? Her kit obviously outside of ATB moves, like a Yakuza character with different chains and different unique cancels, and more moves with different follow-ups, and more moves with unique inputs or context-sensitive tools. More tools. But even then, the problem with that is that with a strong battery character in this game, you're going to be spending almost all of your gameplay time doing or inputting some sort of ATB move once you really optimize the ATB generation, and only a few brief moments are spent in between your ATB moves just to generate the ATB to get back to doing more ATB moves. Even if they added a bunch of non-ATB shit to the game, I'm not sure you'd even do a lot of it when you can already easily just be doing ATB moves almost non-stop.
So maybe that needs to get nerfed, or maybe the game needs to solve these problems and make things more interesting while under the assumption that it's almost all going to be ATB moves all the time, that the player will be doing once they have a strong battery character with materia like ATB Assist and Skill Master. I mean, a really brain-dead obvious idea to add to the game is one that they're clearly already doing based on the trailer with Yuffie, but team-up abilities. You can see in the trailer for the Yuffie DLC, whatever it is, that it requires 1 ATB from each character involved. So that has some strategic merit to it, adding a reason to keep 2 specific characters with ATB available for some tag team move that you might want in a particular moment. Oh, this should also be obvious, but I'm in favor of more, like, unique weapon abilities, not just offensive abilities, but, like, Eris's moves, ATB moves, are all very interesting, except for ATB Wood, which just sucks. But, yeah, she has a lot of non-offensive tools that are really cool. There should probably be more defensive weapon abilities to, say, block damage, or apply some sort of buff or debuff. I know you can get a pure ATB move with, enemy skill, from Bad Breath that applies some status effects, so something like that, but not so, like, set up in such a way that it's probably never going to be used by anyone. But anyways, another thing that I feel is underexplored is the summons in this game. Now, I don't mean that the game needs more summons or anything like that. I only used a summon maybe 2 times in total across my 3 playthroughs. No, I mean, when you have a summon out, there's an interesting mechanic where basically all characters share the same moves. Any character can spend their own personal ATB gauge to trigger one of the summon's attacks. So, that's, I know, like, interesting, I guess. There's not really much else to say about that besides that, but it's worth pointing out. What about crits? Crits don't really do much in this game. I have no real reason to strive for them unless I were to take out a calculator and do the math and figure out which would be more likely to have higher DPS over time, going with pure attack power or going for high crit rate. Unless I'm looking at the numbers coming off of each attack, I don't even really notice when I'm getting critical hits as I'm playing. What if crits did something like build extra ATB or some additional mechanic we know nothing about? That still wouldn't be great game design because it's still not influencing, like, how you play the game, because you still just hit the enemies however the fuck you feel like, and some of them just happen to be critical hits. So it'd still be pretty meaningless, strategically speaking. But yeah, mechanics should influence how the player makes choices in real-time combat. But anyways, right now, the only thing that you can do to influence your crit rate is to get to low HP, where you could get a 50% boost from some of the weapons, that which I feel is safe to say most people are not going to do. They're not going to just hang out at low HP just to have high crit rate and do, like, slightly more damage. If I had any other ideas for this game, I'm forgetting what they are right now, so, you know, who gives a fuck? I think that about does it for my thoughts on the gameplay of this fucking game. I'm in this weird position where I really don't like this game, and I have so many problems with it, and yet I find myself weirdly looking forwards to, say, the Yuffie DLC, and seeing what they've done to enemy AI or basic systems. Something as deep as enemy behavior and actions probably won't get fixed in this upcoming DLC. Actually, for all I know, they won't retool enemies they've already designed even in the future games, like Part 2. So they might not even fix any of these clusterfuck problems for this whole goddamn series. But yeah, you know, like how Bojack talks about Becker, about how it's not good, but it could be so much more, and that's what keeps him feeling strangely optimistic about it. That's pretty much where I'm at right now. But to really dive into that resentment I feel towards this game, I would need to talk about the narrative, and, you know, I guess the way that this game is, like, consumed by the buying audience, let's say. So that is what I will do in my next obnoxiously long video essay. I hope to see you there as well, my sweet summer children. Toodles, you fucking normies.